the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, the very good afternoon to you. The time is 1:02 on Monday, February the 16th. I'm David Bull. I'm in for Ian Collins. Coming up, Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he is ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine to enforce any peace deal as he attends crisis talks with European leaders in Paris today. The big question, does he actually have your support in that? Meanwhile, Britain risks creating a new blasphemy law by the back door by charging a man over the burning of the Quran outside Turkey's London consulate. So the question this afternoon, is free speech now under threat here in the United Kingdom? And more than 25,000 illegal migrants have reached Britain in just 7 months since Labour came to power. Your thoughts on that and all of the above, please. You can call us, you can leave a WhatsApp voice note as well, 0344 499 1000. You can also text the word talk and your message to 87222. You can also message us on X at talkTV. Well, a very good afternoon to you. Very strange for me to be here in the afternoon instead of the morning, but thank you very much indeed for your company. Now, the big story this morning, and we've been talking about it all over the weekend, about Ukraine. This morning, the story has moved on somewhat. So Keir Starmer has announced he's ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine to enforce any peace deal. The Prime Minister says he has not taken the decision to consider putting British servicemen and women in harm's way lightly. This is the first time, he says, he is actively considering deploying British peacekeepers to Ukraine. And this comes ahead of the meeting. As I said, of course, we've got the situation where we've got the United States and Russia trying to broker a deal without Zelensky, without Ukraine. And, of course, this has caused apoplexy here in the United Kingdom with the political elite and also with the European Union as well. And they are about to meet. Joining me now, Candice Holdsworth, who is a writer and broadcaster. Good afternoon, Candice.
Hi, David. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Long time no see. Let's talk about the latest here. So Keir Starmer says he is ready and willing to put British troops on the ground. It is in pretty much every single paper this morning. He is trying to adopt this situation or the perspective of him being the world leader. He is going to make this decision and he is going to commit British troops to the soil to keep the peace in Ukraine. I will start with the question I'm going to ask everyone this afternoon. Do you think he has the support of the British public to do so?
Well, my immediate thought when I saw that headline was, what does this mean? And I'm sure most people thought that, like, we don't want to get involved in some sort of conflict. But, you know, when you dig a bit deeper into it, I think what he's trying to do is there's been a few scenarios sort of people have explored about what will happen after some sort of negotiated settlement, the peace that's coming, that will follow after, you know, all the various parties get together. And one of them was a sort of demilitarized buffer zone. And it seems this is what Keir Starmer is kind of pushing for, because this is what Ukraine's security concerns are, basically. I mean, they've said, can we have NATO membership? Is EU membership possible? Or some sort of peacekeeping force on the border? And this is what Keir Starmer, that's the scenario he's going for, because I guess he's looking for, you know, the new role that he's going to play in a Europe that has to play a much bigger role in securing its defenses against countries like Russia, because America's saying we're not going to do that anymore. You know, they've sort of rejected the post-war liberal order where they played a massive role in Europe's defenses, and we still don't know what that picture looks like. We've had things a certain way for 80 years now, and now they're saying, actually, no, you've got to do something different. And EU leaders are just absolutely furious after this J.D. Vance speech.
But you see, these are home truths, and they are accurate. And this was Pete Hegseth over the weekend saying, as you say, Europe cannot continue to rely on the US and must pay 5% GDP towards NATO. They refuse to commit US troops to the soil there. Hence, Starmer's suggestion that they will be British boots on the soil. Also, the idea that NATO NATO membership for Ukraine was not a realistic outcome. So, as you say, suddenly the European leaders and Keir Starmer here are trying desperately to formulate some sort of plan. I thought Lord Dannett, the former head of the army, said something really interesting this morning. He said, look, we are there, and when you look at the numbers of troops that we have, so we've got 75,000 troops, 75,000 army troops, fine, you commit us to the soil to keep peace, but the quid pro quo is you have to arm us properly, and that means you have to increase your spending of GDP so that we make sure that our troops are well looked after. And this big row is raging over how much percentage of GDP we then spend. So at the moment we're around we're aiming towards 2.3%. The question is, do we go to 2.5? Do we go to 3? Do we go to 5, which is what Dannett wants? And then obviously at the same time we have the Strategic Defence Review taking place. It seems to be taking a very long time.
I know. Yeah, this has sort of been like electroshock therapy for Europe and for Britain. And defence is something we've been enormously complacent about for many years. And as so many commentators have pointed out, we sort of allow America to do the heavy lifting on that while we spend huge amounts of money on welfare, for instance. And Keir Starmer, I find it so fascinating. He does have these pragmatic flashes of personality, and there were reports that he was thinking about overruling the Treasury on increasing defence spending. So he is actually taking this quite seriously. I mean, it's definitely a position both of the centre-left and the centre-right to be quite strong in its support for Ukraine. So presumably he thinks that this is something that we should aim for, and this is a way of securing Ukraine's peace in the future, whilst also trying to figure out, you know, what a sort of Europe looks like after the US withdraws and pivots to China. So we absolutely have to start taking defense more seriously. How can we talk so big on things when we can't back it up? We just can't. And, you know, Pete Hegseth didn't put things delicately, but you know what he said was right when he said, you know, you can't shoot flags, you can't shoot words. You know, the fact of the matter is, if you are going to pose as a great power, you need to have the means to back it up.
You certainly do. Just in terms of the percentage of GDP, it's interesting, of course, we've committed to give 3 billion or thereabouts to Ukraine every single year. If we went up to 2.5% of GDP, that would add about 5 billion to the defence budget. Now, many people in this country, I would suggest, would say, actually, I'd rather the money was spent on protecting the United Kingdom, increasing our defence budget, as opposed to having a random ring-fence target that we're giving to Ukraine for a war that many people believe that we cannot win.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that's where the mood is going. I think everybody's looking towards a negotiated settlement instead of this sort of maximalist position of total victory. I think at the moment, the mood in the country is that our spending priorities are all off. I mean, I've mentioned welfare spending, for instance, you know, this increasing worklessness problem, which is giving us lots of trouble on the international markets as well. It's just ballooning. It's posing a real threat to Britain being able to make its debt payments. So, yeah, so I think people would prioritise. If you were to ask people what their biggest priorities were in terms of UK spending, they would say things like health, education, defence. I mean, these just seem like the common sense positions that any government would take to prioritise. And, you know, I think a lot of people are looking towards what's happening with Doge in America, where they are sort of realigning their priorities and they're starting to say, you know, what are we spending taxpayers' money on? And government needs to be a good custodian of taxpayers' money.
And of course, at the moment, we're seeing the US and Russia entering these negotiations, Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov being there, Zelensky saying, hang on a minute, I need to be there. What did you make of his calls over the weekend when he said, what we need is a European army? I have to say, from my point of view, I was pretty horrified by that. We have NATO.
Yes, yeah, no, I think most people would be opposed to that. I think Ukraine's just pushing hard. I mean, they're sort of taking maximalist negotiating positions as well. They shouldn't be left out of any peace talks, I think. I don't think it would be credible if they were left out of peace talks. You know, anything that is built now needs to have lasting credibility and be able to hold, because if you look throughout all of history, peace deals have been struck, negotiated settlements have been struck, and then they've fallen apart quite quickly because they didn't have that sort of lasting vision and that credibility that something like the Marshall Plan had after World War II, which, I know that many in America are becoming skeptical of the post-war liberal order, but it was an incredible achievement what they did, being able to turn enemies like Japan and Germany into permanent allies. I mean, that is a huge thing. And if we want to achieve something similar, we have to include Ukraine in that. I think otherwise no one will take the deal seriously.
But if we agree to leave Russia with the land that they've captured since 2014, doesn't this smack of appeasement? Essentially what we're saying to Putin is, fine, you've won. Watch and wait whilst Russia regroups and then tries to re-invade another European country. Isn't that a real threat? That's exactly what Lord Frost said.
Yeah, this is what everyone's afraid of. I mean, for me, it wasn't a surprise when I heard that. When you heard people like Hegseth say, well, actually, no, they can't expect to go back to the borders. Because, if you've been watching things for a while, there's sort of been the skepticism that, the Ukraine can get anything back at all. I think there's a sort of, an attitude of realpolitik governing in Washington at the moment. Though I would say Ukraine isn't in a totally weak position. I mean, they did take some Russian territory, so they do have something to bargain with. I don't think a little pipsqueak here. I think there is something that they can do as long as they are included in the negotiations. From what I've read from all the experts on Russia, what they say about Putin is he's all about legacy. And he will want to, it is possible that he'll want to be seen as a great statesman, coming out of this, having, helped Russia was able to defeat all these forces arrayed against them, and they still came out of it without having to give too much up. But then there's also, the possibility that he will also just wait and watch and see if he can try again. And we have to take that very seriously. There is an unpredictability there that we, can't just dismiss. And I do think that there are some on the American right who are sort of reigning supreme in Washington right now who think that it's all a phantasm, the Russia threat, that it's something that's just been made up by liberals who are still living in the Cold War. But there is a small possibility of that happening, and we do have to take that seriously.
I absolutely agree. I actually think the world has never been so insecure, actually, in my lifetime, as we are now sitting on a very tricky situation. How much of this, though, do you think is Starmer trying to shore up his political position? Actually, let's just pause. Let's hear what Keir Starmer said this morning, exactly about committing British boots to soil to keep the peace in Ukraine.
We are going through a strategic review of defence at the moment, which is looking at the challenges and the capability, and then we'll set out that path. But part of my message to our European allies is that we've all got to step up on both capability and on spending and funding. That includes the UK, which is why we've made that commitment to spend more.
And, of course, this strategic defence review that he talks about, Lord Robertson is in charge of that. It seems to have taken an inordinate amount of time for this to actually come to any conclusion. Of course, this is Lord Robertson, who's the former Defence Secretary, and Sir Richard Barron, the retired general. How much of this do you think is political expediency from Starmer? He knows he's in trouble domestically. I think he is in a precarious political position. He is now threatening to overrule Rachel Reeves in terms of how much we commit to the armed forces. She says we have no fiscal headroom, and she's right on that because, of course, she's spending money like water. How much of this is Starmer saying, I'm important, I'm going to broker this deal, the United Kingdom is the key ally of the United States?
Yeah, I think that's very perceptive. I think that's true. He's, come in for so much criticism at home for also being abroad a lot. But I think he's hoping that that will pay dividends, that he's building all these relationships, in a time of a very complex geopolitics, that he could emerge as quite a key player in this, managing all these different relationships, managing his relationship with the European Union, managing the relationship with the US, and possibly being a bridge between the two, and looking good whilst doing it. And, maybe he's actually been quite shrewd in sort of identifying that role for himself, because a lot of people, there are those who are critical of him probably always will be critical of him. But there are many others who think, yes, well, maybe that's the role that Britain can play right now. So, we'll see how it works out for him.
We certainly will. Candice, thanks for the moment. Let me just throw open that question to everyone listening and watching at home. So the Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he's ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine to enforce any peace deal with Russia. What is your reaction to that? What's your gut feeling on that? Do you think the British public is behind that? Or the other question and the other thought I have this afternoon is actually if we increase GDP defence spending, then of course we're talking about similar sorts of money to the money that we are ring-fencing to spend on Ukraine. The number 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can message us at X as well. So many messages already coming in this afternoon. David, this is Trevor in Harrow. Even if Starmer could find the money to take up negotiated defence budget up to 2.5%, who in their right mind would want to join an army for a government that seems to hate its own people, especially the white working class and the farmers? Thanks, Trevor. Christina in Spain, good afternoon to you. Good to see you, David. Lovely surprise. Surprise for me as well. So Starmer will send our wonderful troops to prevent harm to the Ukrainians, but he won't protect the British from the invasion of fighting-age men into this country. The man should hold his head in shame. Keep all of those messages coming in. After the break, we'll talk about some of the other top stories that are making the headlines today. This is Talk.
What we need to do is get rid of the bureaucratic nightmare that's the NHS. It really is a bureaucracy. If you review a patient's notes now, and I've been in the business 50 years as a doctor, so I can remember the past. Someone was in charge. The doctors were in charge of the patients, and they'd make sure they got a good journey through the bureaucracy of the system. Okay, when I was first a consultant, the costs were much lower than they are now of treating people, and most people were a lot younger.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk. A very good afternoon to you. I'm joined by Candice Holdsworth, writer and broadcaster this afternoon. Candice, let's move on and talk about the Attorney General, shall we? I think for many people, he was a really odd choice of Attorney General, and he is consistently in the headlines. Now, the story today, which is in the Telegraph, is the Attorney General defended the terrorist who plotted to bomb the Manchester shopping centre. Yes, you heard that correctly. The Attorney General defended an Islamist terrorist who was just days from carrying out a bombing attack on a Manchester shopping centre. Now, Lord Hermer described MI5's case against Abid Nazir, the ringleader of an Al-Qaeda terror cell based in the northeast, as pitiful and far-fetched. Later on, this student, the Pakistani student, was found guilty in a US court of plotting to detonate a car bomb outside Manchester's Arndale Centre and then kill hundreds of Easter shoppers by placing suicide bombers at the exits. Now, this, for me, once again, makes you think there is an error of judgment on Keir Starmer's part. Now, you also have to remember, he and Hermer go back a long way to the same chambers, I believe.
Yes, yeah, I think a lot of scrutiny now is being placed on human rights law. I mean, there's just been so many cases now where you've seen, you know, very what would seem to be just a common sense interpretation of whether someone can stay in the country or not, or whether they pose a threat or not, being given special dispensation because of, say, like the right to a family life or something like that. Because, you know, the most ridiculous case that emerged last week, you know, because the child didn't like chicken nuggets. You know, I think a lot of the problem that, you know, people have with human rights lawyers at the moment is a lot of them take the sort of far left position that it is the British state or it is British history which is uniquely suspect, and that a lot of these people being accused of doing things are being persecuted in some way. You know, I will completely defend what we have in this country, that everyone has the right to leave.
Sure. But do you think he's the right person to be Attorney General?
Well, no, because I think, you know, as we see with the Chagos deal, I mean, they put international law and, you know, what may actually be a very questionable judgment by a hugely partisan person in China above our national interest. And I think that that's what you'll see time and time again with human rights law, because I think a lot of them are sort of contemptuous of those sorts of ideas. They will, you know, look at these individuals, you know, these individual terrorists as people who've maybe been historically wronged for whatever reason. So no, I think that's not what we want right now, especially as people really do see it sort of judges versus the democratic will of the people on very big issues right now, like immigration. You know, people do not like that the ECHR is overriding what we elect our politicians to do in this country. So no, I don't think he's read the move very well on this. Though, you know, like I say, you know, we should always defend the right for someone to have a legal defense, you know, just because, you know, he even if someone is accused of terrorist offences, they should still have a lawyer to do that. I
understand that there is also the cab rank principle where they take the first case which comes onto the top of the pile, but also, once again, what it does do is shine a light on the ECHR, and in my humble opinion, we need to leave. Let's just talk about two big health stories, and these are great health stories, I think, actually. A new test for prostate cancer. This is in the Telegraph today. A new 96% accurate prostate cancer test has been developed by scientists. This is backed by Olympic cycling champion Sir Chris Hoy. It's brilliantly clever. So the PSA, which we currently use, is a terrible test. The idea behind all of this is they look at biomarkers, 100 biomarkers, use AI, and then decide whether those patients are at high risk of getting prostate cancer or indeed do have prostate cancer, which is a brilliant breakthrough, and let's hope that actually comes to pass. That is in trial at the moment. The second story is about mammograms and actually how few women actually go for their mammogram when they are invited. This is being headed, this campaign, by Victoria Derbyshire. She is the Newsnight anchor and breast cancer survivor. She is essentially backing the NHS screening awareness campaign, calling on women to take up their invite for a mammogram. The new data shows just 46% of women go for their mammogram when invited.
I know. People don't take it seriously. I mean, about 5 years ago, just after I'd had my first baby, I actually had a breast cancer scare. I mean, everything was fine. But since then, you know, I've immersed myself in women's health issues, you know, and I've learned just how key early detection is. So, I mean, you must check Go for your mammogram if you're invited to. You know, do self-examination yourself. Go for your smear test. You know, what people don't realize is how lucky we are to live in the time that we live in, where this health apparatus exists to keep us well and that can treat us for things like cancer. I mean, no one throughout human history has had access to something like this before. I think that AI is going to play such a revolutionary role in diagnostics. I mean, this is what all the leaders of AI have been saying. I mean, these huge, large language models are going to be able to just examine all this data and be able to tell so many things. You know, some things that can take decades for very experienced doctors to be able to do, especially with unusual presentations and things like that. So, I mean, I'm very excited about the future.
I would agree. And also, of course, we need to urge women to go for their mammograms. I think a lot of it, actually, is fear of the unknown, wondering about getting a diagnosis you don't want. But as you say, if you can catch it early, you can deal with it. And, of course, your prognosis is so much better. Very quickly, if I may, though, do you do exercise to keep yourself fit and healthy?
I do. Well, I mean, I've got a little baby at the moment, so, you know, a lot of it just revolves around taking him for walks or taking the dog for a walk. And, you know, people don't realize that, you know, you only need to do something like 20 minutes, half an hour a day, and it has so many benefits for all the things that affect people later in life, like diabetes and Alzheimer and high blood pressure and heart problems. You know, I think when people think about like going to the gym, it can sometimes be hard to work themselves up to doing that. But, you know, there's things that you can do at home. I mean, you could just do, you know, star jumps on the spot and things like that.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because obviously the NHS says you need to do 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity exercise per week. So people think of the things you talk about, so going for a run, jogging, or going to the gym or whatever. Here's some brilliant news, though. Dancing in your kitchen for 20 minutes a day is enough to help you hit your exercise targets. I say that is brilliant. And of course, it's based on Sophie Ellis-Bextor and her kitchen disco.
Yeah, and that was so fun. I absolutely loved that when she did that during lockdown. It was so happy and it really lifted everyone's spirits. And it's so true, you know, people sort of think of exercise as like thing. You know, they have to go to the gym and sweat it out. But actually, you can make it fun. You can make exercise fun. That's, you know, just sort of imagine it in the way it works for you in your life.
Quite right. The extraordinary thing is this was actually a scientific paper from scientists from Northeastern University in Boston in Massachusetts. They took 48 participants from the ages, wait for this, from 18 to 83 and looked at a range of rhythmic experiences and asked them to take part in 5-minute bouts of dancing. They looked at all of the above, and essentially what they found was the answer was yes, yes, yes. All adults were able to reach a health-enhancing level of activity without being told what intensity to dance at. So essentially the message is pick your tune, stand in the kitchen and just jiggle around.
Yes. You know, I'll have to chat to you about this at another time, but I'm fascinated by the super ages. You know, the people who get into their 80s, who are still so fit and well and are able to do so much. And I know it's not just down to movement. I know it's that they also keep their mind sharp as well. I think we're talking a lot about these things, about health and longevity. It's becoming, you know, sort of, you know, real interest of people, you know, not just the quantity of my life, but the quality of my life. You know,
I would agree. I also think it's about eating well and all the rest of it, but it's also about being engaged mentally and also having company. My big worry for older people is they're often socially isolated, and if you live on your own, you only have your own thoughts to deal with, and you need to get out and you need to be social. That is what we are designed to do.
Yeah, that plays a huge role in it. And I think, you know, our society isn't always set up for that as well. You know, I think we live in a very individualistic society where people sort of go online a lot. So I was really pleased when I heard that younger people are sort of starting to reject online dating a bit. And they're doing these running clubs and things like that. All sort of get together and meet people. And, you know, it's very wholesome, it's very happy, and it's very different from when I was in my 20s, I must say.
What did you get up to in your 20s?
Oh, don't even get me started, you know, don't even get me started. Though I do think I did experimentation the right way around, so I sort of got it all out of my system. So I'm unlikely to have a midlife crisis where suddenly I'm going out partying every night.
Right. I have so many questions for you now, based on what you have just said. So the answer to all of this is to go for your mammogram, make sure you use AI to find any diagnosis early, and to have a kitchen disco.
Yeah, I think so. That's good advice, right?
Great advice. Candice, thanks ever so much. Really good to talk to you this afternoon. Candice Holdsworth, their writer and broadcaster. Lots of messages coming in. So I'm asking this afternoon about this big story, front page of the Daily Telegraph. Starmer, I'm ready. He is ready, apparently, to put troops in Ukraine. Hang on a minute. Are the troops ready to go to Ukraine? Are you ready for the troops to go to Ukraine? Do you underwrite that? That's the question I'm asking this afternoon. He says he's ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine to enforce any peace deal with Russia. Do you support this? What's your reaction this afternoon? 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Loads of you getting in touch here. Hi, Dr. David. This putting boots on the ground in Ukraine is nothing more than an excuse to once again raise taxes. I think it is actually deeply political. It is designed for him to look like a statesman on the world stage at a time when the EU is falling apart and all the countries pulling in different directions. Thank you for that. This one says from Shirley, good afternoon. From the interview where Starmer confirmed he preferred Davos to Parliament, he's been using his position to steer the next step of his career into the EU Parliament. It's obvious that is what he is aiming for, to do the same as Neil Kinnock, to live in Brussels on the gravy train. Lammy is grifting for exactly the same. They're all feathering their nest. They are loathsome. David, this is Peter. If we have 75,000 troops, that's my understanding, in the army. Putin has, even in a time of war, 150,000 troops aligned against the Belarusian border. It is impossible to protect against those odds by Britain alone. Putin has a long-term plan without doing much other than entering Trump. He will do it for him. Loads of other messages coming in, also about percentages of GDP. I was looking back at this. Our current level is 2.3%. The expectation is we get to 2.5%. The MOD wants 2.65%. When you look back at 1990, which isn't that long ago, it was 3.8%. Lord Dannett says it should be 5%. Russia is spending far more than that on defence as a percentage of their GDP. Dr. David, this one says, before World War II, the UK's defence spending was low, around 2 to 3% of GDP. By 1937, it had risen to around 6.9% of GDP. During the Second World War, with the outbreak of war in 1939, defence spending increased dramatically, and by 1944 to 1945, it reached its peak at around 50%. The message, David, is clear. Spend 5% now, or you spend 50% in a few years when Putin invades the Baltics. We'll take a break. After the break, I'm going to be talking to Mesa Gifford, who's a former British volunteer with the Ukrainian army, about the situation in Ukraine, the deal that is potentially being brokered between Russia and America, leaving Zelensky and Ukraine out of that deal, and also the United Kingdom and the European Union, I think it's fair to say, in abject chaos. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, 1:37. Loads of you getting in touch. David, I think you're right regarding Starmer trying to look like the big I am abroad. Blair, Cameron and Obama were all more popular outside their own countries, and I feel Starmer is trying to do the same, hoping for a big international job after he's destroyed the UK. Look, call me a maverick. It just seems a very odd position to me for the Prime Minister to make, to say, I'm going to act as a bridge to Trump. In peace talks, what is Trump thinking? Is he thinking, oh, I'm very worried because Keir Starmer's about to get involved? Also, this headline in the Daily Telegraph, Starmer, I'm ready to put troops in Ukraine. Just looking back at the percentages of GDP, this is quite interesting. We were talking about in the Second World War, our percentage GDP getting up to 50%. Russia right now is spending 40% of its GDP on defence. Ukraine, 34%. When you contrast that with us at 2.3%, and other European countries which fall far below that, then you have to ask yourselves some very deep and searching questions. Let's talk more about Ukraine now with Mesa Gifford, who is a former British volunteer with the Ukrainian army. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
What do you think of this? Starmer saying, I am ready and willing to put British troops in Ukraine. He says, I will put them on the ground. He has said he isn't taking that decision lightly. This seems a very odd sort of posturing to me because, of course, you've got this deal being brokered between Russia and between the United States, even Ukraine itself not being involved in that. And Starmer trying to, I assume, in some way, assert the moral high ground and to look like a statesman on the world stage.
Yeah, well, it's. I think we're really getting our hand forced here. It's quite clear in both successive governments, from the Conservatives to the Labour Party, that they were determined to defend Ukraine at all costs. It's a big part of Britain's foreign policy post-Brexit to be engaging and to take leadership stands on things like the defence in Europe, with a commitment to give £3 billion a year to Ukraine for as long as it takes. Donald Trump's sort of sudden change of policy for the United States is very unwelcome here. And as far as I'm concerned, a bit of a disaster. As far as I'm concerned, is this should be a last resort, putting British troops on the ground to keep the peace. But as I said, we may be forced to do that anyway if Donald Trump continues on the way that he's going.
Do you think that that decision would have the endorsement of the British public?
I think it would be intensely controversial, but saying that, there is a need. For example, if Ukraine were to fall, if Ukraine, even if large parts of Ukraine were to fall and Russia was to continue spending in the way that it has done over the last couple of years, then we would have to deploy our troops on NATO commitments in places like Poland and in the Baltics anyway, and in large numbers. It's the real problem here is the fact that neither Ukraine or Russia is winning this war decisively. But one thing that the Ukrainians do have on their side, if they were to be given support from the United States, Britain, etc., is time. And with the Russian economy crumbling at the moment, with the chance that soon Russia will not be able to supply the front line with the amount of artillery, tanks and other munitions needed to sustain their current level of operations, then, as I said, time is on our hands and we're negotiating with Putin at the very worst time.
Just in terms of the talks and Trump's methodology here, he obviously believes that he is the kingmaker. He knows about the art of the deal. He believes that he can get a deal across the line. Now, there was talk yesterday about Russia ceding land. Now, this morning, or just earlier on, in a couple of hours ago, Russia now has said it has no plans to give up territory it has seized in Ukraine. This is according to Sergei Lavrov speaking today. How much is going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of negotiation. There's a lot, and there's multiple people to negotiate with. It's not just Russia. It's not just Ukraine. It's also European partners, and within the United States itself. And there's also sort of a wider plan as well. What will a sort of a failed negotiation in Ukraine do, or a bad deal, I should say, in Ukraine do for the long-term interests of Europe and America? The big concern is that Vladimir Putin will get a ceasefire. A ceasefire is the most easy thing to get at the moment, and he will rearm and then re-attack Ukraine at a later date. At his current level of spending, he'll be able to replace his losses in vehicles and munitions within just a few years. And he will really, truly threaten Europe then. One of the things that we really should be considering is actually doubling down in Ukraine and doing much more for the Ukrainians to give a strategic and decisive defeat of Russia there as a lesson to China.
Sorry to jump in. How do we do that if the US is not keen to do that? And of course, what we're seeing is this emergency European summit convened by Macron, which is going to start at 3 o'clock this afternoon. How do we do that? Is there actually the sort of morale amongst the European leaders to do that, flying in the face of a United States saying, no, we've had enough?
Well, I think it's a wake-up call more than anything else then, because as you say, Donald Trump thinks he's a bit of a deal maker. He's done some terrible deals in the past. The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan was pioneered by Trump. The
under
terrible
Biden,
decision,
though, wasn't it?
It was under Biden, but the negotiation between the Taliban and the US, the agreement was under Trump. And in Syria, when he threatened to pull out troops in 2018, the US saw a severe weakening of its position in that country as well, way back in 2018. And my big fear is that he's going to make the same mistake in Syria. And when it comes to Europe, we do need to be spending more. And in particular, we need to be investing in mass.
Sorry, when it comes to Europe, we need to spend more.
All of us.
What do you mean in terms of percentage GDP for defence? Is that what you're saying?
Defence, I mean,
yeah.
Yes. Because one thing that we really need to do is we should even consider this citizen army idea that was put forward by certain members of the British Army. I do like the idea of people volunteering to be mobilised in the event of a severe sort of war in Europe or a global crisis that affects Britain. The idea that we may be able to raise 200,000 troops is much more of a deterrent to Russia and others than our current position.
I mean, in terms of that and having a citizen army, I asked young people over the weekend whether they would be prepared to fight for this country, and the answer was a resounding no.
But I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people would not want to do that in the current climates, and there's so much polarization in Britain. But the idea of getting 200,000 people to volunteer in such a circumstance from a population pool of more than 60 million, I think we'll be easily able to achieve that number. So it's about making sure that we have that mass, the ability to grow, but also making sure in storage we've got enough weapons to equip them and arm them and everything else.
So the dichotomy here is Starmer is obviously standing up saying, I'm going to be the deal maker between the US and the rest of the EU or with the EU. At the same time, refusing to commit to an uplift in defence spending. Now, you can't have both.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a slightly clownish position to take. The problem here is we really need to be at 3% as a minimum for British defence. And we should also be investing much more in our ability to our blue water navy, more ships, the ability, long-range strikes. We also need to grow our combat air and, more importantly, defence as well to stop incoming ballistic and intercontinental missiles. I just hope that Keir Starmer isn't just posturing, as you said at the beginning of this talk, and that actually he does have a plan for Europe, for Britain, and also for Ukraine, who are the biggest victims here. They've seen their country destroyed.
So I agree with you. I think we need to be at least at 3%. I think we probably need to get to 4 or 5%. Now, to get to 3%, that's another 10 billion quid we've got to find. Now, the appetite amongst the public, I think, and I would gesture that actually the public would be more behind giving more money to defending this realm than to putting ring-fencing 3 billion quid a year to protect Ukraine and to supply Ukraine with ammunition, depleting our own stocks.
No. because we do need to invest abroad and give weapons and support to our allies. I would be looking actually at we spend something like 4 or 5 billion. I have to double check those numbers on just hotel bills and supporting illegal migration into Britain. If we were to tackle down on that, and by the way, that money comes from our overseas aid budget. That money should be for the poorest people in the world, but instead we're spending it on hotels in Britain. If we were to go after that money and invest it in defence, then we're starting to show Britain's growing power, influence, and ability to protect itself.
Well, I think the public would agree with you. The fact is, and I'm going to talk about this later this afternoon, 25,000 illegal migrants have come here since Starmer came to power. We have lost control of the borders. You are absolutely right. Get rid of the illegal migrants from this country. Stop paying for the hotels and put that money, ring-fence that money, either into the health service or defence or both.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. There are many other areas also that we can get extra funding, but the funding is there, but the political will is not. And as soon as we get that political will, a lot of our problems will be solved, or at least we'll be putting a severe dent into them anyway.
Can I just ask you this as well? US military volunteers fighting alongside the Ukraine's armed forces have branded President Donald Trump a jackass. I think I can say this at the time in the afternoon. Over the peace talks with Vladimir Putin, they've acted furiously to Trump's news. Look, Trump is no fool here, and Putin is no fool either. I just wonder whether Trump is going in high, so he's luring Putin. Look, is he being cleverer than we think? I don't know.
Well, I've agonized over this. Trump is a mystery wrapped in an enigma, as Churchill once said about science. So it is very difficult to understand. I've actually was dwelling for a long time on his reasoning behind threatening to invade Greenland and Panama and all the rest of it, or at least throwing things like that out into the discourse. Then I realized that would be certainly a very good way to get Europe to spend more on defense if suddenly he turns the tables, and that would be a genius move, to say the least. But saying that, as I said, in the past, he has made fundamental mistakes, because the trouble with Trump is he sees the greatest threat to the United States as China. He wants to pivot US foreign policy to that region. And in doing so, he's willing to almost cede territory in places like Ukraine and Syria and other places to the other regional powers. But the trouble is that feeds into what Russia and China has been arguing for a while. And that is sort of they call it a multipolar world. It's the idea that the US, Western civilization, no longer dominates the world, and instead we should almost balkanize it by having different regional powers. And Donald Trump is feeding that narrative by retreating in certain areas. What we shouldn't be doing is that. We should be investing anywhere and everywhere and exerting Western power around the world. China and Russia are dictatorships. They are the very opposite of our societies and our culture and everything else. We should be fighting back and pushing back against them, because it's very much in our interests.
Mesa, really good to talk to you. Thank you for your time this afternoon. That's Mesa Gifford there, former British volunteer with the Ukrainian army. Lots of messages coming in. David, a citizen army. This is David in the Cotswold. That made me belly laugh. The white working class to the rescue once again. It's not going to happen. Britain is already broken by welfare benefits and illegal immigrations. Yeah, that big figure, 25,000 illegal migrants have come here since Keir Starmer came to power. Remember, this is the Prime Minister who ditched the Rwanda policy. This is the Prime Minister who is chucking money at Europe to say he is solving the problem. It's not working. We'll take a break now. I'll then take your calls, your thoughts and your messages. This is Talk.
Well, yes, but of course they already are. I mean, they poisoned some people in Salisbury a few years ago. They routinely interfere with disinformation to subvert our public discourse. There are plenty of allegations around cyber attacks and whatever else. So, Russia already regards the UK as a thought leader in Europe and a sort of a leading rallier, if you like, of European opposition.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Just to tell you, the emergency European summit convened by President Emmanuel Macron will be held in Paris today from 3 o'clock our time, attended by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He will be there. Poland's Donald Tusk is there. Italy's Giorgia Meloni, NATO's Mark Rutte, the European Commission's Ursula von der Leyen. Now, the idea behind this is they aim to establish a unified European strategy concerning the conflict in Ukraine, particularly in light of the US, of their decision and President Trump's decision to initiate negotiations to end the conflict without European involvement. I think the big word going around Europe is panic. Let's take a call. Simon in Sevenoaks, good afternoon.
Hello, Dr. David, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks very much. What are you thinking this afternoon?
Oh, well, I'm thinking Starmer's an imbecile, to be quite honest.
Oh, no, he's a statesman, right?
No, he's trying to be, but it's an empty threat, isn't it? Do you think Putin is going to accept NATO forces, and in particular British forces, in Ukraine on the Russian border when he sees us as an active belligerent in the conflict?
No, absolutely not. Also, there's something that really jars in here to me. He says, I'm ready to put troops in Ukraine. He also says, this is a decision I haven't taken lightly, to put British servicemen and women in harm's way. How much... That jars deeply with me, and it feels desperately like political posturing.
Not only is it posturing, it's downright reckless. The man he's already proved that he's got zero concept of geopolitical thinking, we can't even put an armoured division into the field. Our mob stores have been depleted by supplying Ukraine, so we wouldn't even be able to equip a division, even if we got one into the field. It's just ridiculous. He's writing cheques that the white working class British person is going to have to pay for, and he's going to expect us to fight. Why tar us all with that far-right brush? If a man's an imbecile.
Well, I was looking back at my notes, and in July of last year, General Sir Roland Walker said Britain needs to be ready to fight a war in 3 years, the new head of the army. Also, General Sir Patrick Sanders said in June the UK is no longer regarded as a Tier 1 force. The UK tank fleet is so embarrassingly small it would be wiped out in 2 weeks. And yet, despite wake-up call after wake-up call we have done, absolutely nothing about it.
Exactly. I mean, the man can't even defend their own borders, can he? How the hell does he think he's going to defend Ukraine's?
And in terms of the way that this plays out, is there a feeling that actually the UK needs to decide, are we on the side of the United States, our major ally, or are we in bed with Europe?
That is my biggest fear. I mean, for years, the EU have wanted their own armed forces. We already have a multinational force in NATO. Any action independent by the EU is going to undermine NATO, and it's going to push the Americans away. And without the Americans, to be quite frank, on current levels of defending, we've got nothing.
And in terms of Zelensky and his speech to the Munich Security Conference, he called for a united European army. Do you think that was... he stepped over the line there?
Yes, yeah, very much so. I mean, to be quite honest, his path to power wasn't exactly democratic, was it?
No.
You know, and the corruption. I mean, all the stories about Biden, the Hunter Biden laptop, how much money from Ukraine was going to big business and everything like that. It's the New World Order all over again. It's absolutely ridiculous. We shouldn't be getting involved.
One of the other things that came up at the weekend was when I asked young people, would you fight for this country? They said flatly, I would not. Is there a sense that actually this country is now so unrecognisable that people don't feel there's anything to fight for?
Well, I served in the British Army for 10 years in the 80s and 90s, and I would not serve while this government is in power.
Really?
I'm too long in the tooth now. I mean, obviously, I would fight to defend my family,
yeah, of course,
and my country if there was a direct threat to us. But I wouldn't deploy overseas, not for this government.
Simon, really good to talk to you. Thank you for your comments this afternoon. Good afternoon, Dr. David. I joined the army in 1977. I served in Northern Ireland, in Germany and others. I'm sorry to say if I was 17 now, I wouldn't join up for a country that is so overrun by migrants. You joined as a doctor to help me. I joined as a soldier to protect you. But now it's so different. I'm 65. I am beginning to hate what we have become. Keep all of those messages coming in this afternoon, please. Would you fight for your country? That's a big question, isn't it? After the break, I'm going to be talking to Robert Taylor, the political commentator, about the latest political news. There's some really interesting articles. Reform is now seen as stronger and more trustworthy than the Tories, and half of Britain say Rachel Reeves' decisions have made them less confident about the economy. We'll be talking about that after this break. Don't go anywhere. This is Talk. A very good afternoon to you.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good afternoon. Just after 2 o'clock on Monday, February the 17th, I'm David Bill in for Ian Collins. Now, coming up, Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he is ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine to enforce any peace deals as he attends crisis talks with European leaders in Paris today. The big question this afternoon, though, is does he actually have your support? Meanwhile, Britain risks creating a new blasphemy law by the back door by charging a man over the burning of the Quran outside Turkey's London London consulate. So is free speech now under threat in the United Kingdom? And wait for this, more than 25,000 illegal migrants have reached Britain in just 7 months since Labour came to power. Your thoughts on all of the above, please. The number 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged out at the national rate. You can text the word talk and your message to 87222. You can also tweet us, X us, at talkTV. A very good afternoon to you. Now, this afternoon we're talking about this big story which is in all the papers, but Keir Starmer announcing he's ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine to enforce any peace deal. He says, look, I'm not taking this decision lightly. It's a really important decision. And obviously I have to consider putting British servicemen and women in harm's way. Now, many people are actually saying, and many of you have been saying this afternoon, that this is just political posturing and that what he's trying to do is to put himself as a bridgehead between the United States and Europe. And of course, this afternoon, the Emergency European Summit, which has been convened by President Emmanuel Macron, will be held in Paris from 3 o'clock today. Everyone is going to be there in terms of the European leaders. You've got Olaf Scholz there, you've got Donald Tusk, you've got Giorgia Meloni, Mark Rutte, you've got the EU there represented by the European Commission, and of course Ursula von der Leyen. Big questions remain unanswered. How much should we spend of our GDP? Also, this dichotomy for me. Starmer says, right, I'm going to send our troops to the ground to actually enforce peace for Ukraine, but at the same time won't commit to an uplift in spending for defence in terms of the percentage of our GDP. I saw Lord Dannatt being interviewed earlier today. He says, hang on a minute, we are happy as an army to do what you, the government, tell us to do, but you have to equip us properly. Let me know your thoughts on all of the above. What do you think about Starmer and what he has said? He is willing and ready to commit British boots to the soil to keep the peace in Ukraine. Is that the right decision? Is there the appetite from the British public for that? The number 0344 499 1000. I'm also asking this afternoon, would you fight for your country? This is Alan in Notts. David, I wouldn't fight for my country. No, because it is not my country anymore. Steve White in Whiteley Bay says, if Putin sends troops across the channel in small boats, would the government actually attempt to stop them? Good point. Also, we were talking earlier, one of you said that you snorted when we talked about a citizen army. David, with regards to a citizen army, I think Peter Cardwell would be very at home in the trenches on the Eastern Front, albeit a tad cold in the winter months. John, thank you for that. Let's now turn our attention to politics. And joining me now is Robert Taylor, political commentator. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, David.
Let's talk about the changing political fortunes this afternoon, because it is an extraordinary time in British politics. You've got a government that is only 7 months old, really should be in the honeymoon period of its time in office. Keir Starmer, not widely liked. Rachel Reeves liked even less. And, of course, we're seeing the rise of Reform UK. There is a big article today from Sky News, which was done by the YouGov, did a survey showing that Nigel Farage's party now has the potential to reach as much of the electorate as the party run by Kemi Badenoch, and Reform UK seen as stronger and more trustworthy than the Tories. That's going to make very difficult reading for Conservative CCHQ.
It certainly is, David. There's no doubt about that at all. In some ways, it's not a surprise in that the Tories were deeply unpopular when they were booted out just 7 months ago. And, of course, they've been replaced by an even more unpopular government, or equally unpopular government, in Keir Starmer's Labour. I think what Kemi Badenoch will find most disturbing is that, according to this poll, 18%, only 18% of people say that the Tories have a strong sense of direction. And for someone who's been in post now for over 100 days, Kemi Badenoch, she needs to get that sorted out very quickly indeed.
So I was talking to some Conservative Party activists, and they were sort of wringing their heads in their hands, saying Kemi Badenoch just hasn't landed any punches at all in PMQs. They thought she would have a meteoric rise and ascendancy as she sort of became more confident as Conservative leader. But clearly it isn't working.
Well, it's not working. You could say it's still early days.
Is it?
Starmer himself 2 years into being Labour leader, lost Hartlepool. It was about 2 years in, wasn't it? If I remember correctly,
Yeah.
David, he was thinking of resigning immediately afterwards. Maggie Thatcher, still deeply unpopular. She was more unpopular, for those with long memories, as a person, she was more unpopular than Jim Callaghan. And of course, she went on to win that election. So it's not all over yet for Kemi Badenoch, but I would absolutely say she needs to start getting her mantra out there. What does she really stand for? If it's small government that does things better, she needs to say that over and over again so that people start seeing that's what she believes in.
And you have hit the nail on the head there, because when you look at this survey and you look at the Tories versus Reform, when you look at the Conservatives and ask the public about the Conservatives, 59% say we are unclear about what the Conservatives actually stand for.
And you couldn't be clearer about what Nigel Farage stands for. Whether one likes him or not, it's really clear what he stands for. And for opposition parties, that's what they've got to do. I always say, David, it's governments that lose elections, not oppositions that win them. But oppositions have to be ready to win them with a firm offering for the public. And Kemi, at the moment, hasn't got that.
So in terms of strategy, I think one of her biggest mistakes was when she questioned the numbers of people joining Reform, if you remember. She said these figures are absolutely made up. Then, of course, Nigel Farage showed the back end of the website to assembled journalists. And, of course, now it sits at 209,000, nearly 210,000 members. They put out an email, I think it was yesterday, saying we're only 100,000 off what they believe the membership of Labour is. And, of course, that, if Reform overtakes Labour, that will be a very salutary lesson for Labour.
Well, it will. Just a word of warning there, of course, that under Jeremy Corbyn, Labour had an enormous membership, and they went on to get slammed by Boris in the 2019 election. But you're absolutely right. Having that many members just show that this is a growing movement. It's not a flash in the pan. It's not like the Alliance in 1983 that was a sort of, Johnny-come-lately kind of party. It's serious, and it's a very serious threat to both the Tories and to Keir Starmer's Labour.
So, obviously, I'm quite close to this, but the criticisms made of Reform UK in the past was there was no ground game. There was no sort of local associations. They had no infrastructure. That has been changed under Zia Youssef. Why do you think people are starting to turn to Reform? What is it about that party that is attracting people?
Well, I think they are using the language of common sense. For me, the Liberal elite has overreached under both Tories and now very much under Labour. And there's probably what some people are calling an overcorrection. But what's really going on here is that people are absolutely sick of the Tories. They sort of held their nose to vote for Starmer, and they've now got horrendous buyer's remorse, and they realise that what they were told about Labour, that everything would be great so long as we had Keir Starmer as Prime Minister and we booted out the Tories, everything would be great again. And they're now realising they were essentially lied to, and they're going to the only alternative available, which is Reform.
In terms of the government and its priorities, I've never seen a government so adrift so early on in its incumbency. What is going wrong for Labour?
Well, where do you start with Labour? I mean, I think Rachel Reeves's budget was appalling. A lot of people, I think, quite rightly, are worried about things like the Chagos, the Chagos Islands, the whole foreign policy situation at the moment with Trump. Do we go with Trump? Do we go with the EU? Starmer doesn't seem to be sure which way to go. Starmer is letting down, and Rachel Reeves is letting down the British public, who have a lot of faith in them, that they would be true to their word, smash the gangs and have a fairer economy. They're doing none of that.
There is also a poll out from Ipsos which says Chancellor Rachel Reeves's decisions have left half the public, 52%, feeling less confident about economic growth, 14% more confident. When they are asked about specific policies, unsurprisingly, there is strong support for the NHS and more funding for the NHS. I think one of the big undoings, which this highlights as well, is removing the winter fuel allowance for pensioners. And, of course, the other thing that is yet to hit is employers' national insurance contributions.
Yeah, well, that's going to hit in a couple of months' time. And what that poll also showed is that only 14% of people, don't know who they are, by the way, David, but only 14% of people are confident in Rachel Reeves to make the economy stronger. Only 14%. Now, Labour got a third of the vote back in July. And now only 14% of all voters have confidence in the Chancellor of the Exchequer. What a terrible record to have just 7 months into a new government.
And of course, when you look at the economy, sure, she avoided a technical recession. We grew by 0.1%. But there is a fundamental and very important piece of detail there that's missing, which is GDP per head, which is falling. So we have more people coming into this country. It dilutes the economic wealth of this country. And people, therefore, per capita, are poorer.
Yeah, well, it's an easy way to boost growth is just to get 1 million more people in every year. That's, it's a mug's game to do it that way. You're absolutely right to focus on GDP per person. And if GDP per person or per capita is going down, it means standards of living are going down throughout the country. And that's what we're experiencing. We were told we were going to be the fastest growing economy in the G7. We're not. We're just about the slowest, almost as slow as Germany and France, but almost as slow as Germany, certainly. We were told that they were going to smash the gangs. That's how we're going to stop illegal migration. Basically, David, we were sold a pup. And more people who are Labour voters in July last year are beginning to realise they were sold a pup.
There is an article by John Rentoul in The Independent, and I asked him this question, and he vehemently denied it. I said, is there a reshuffle coming up from Cabinet? He said to me, absolutely and categorically no. He's then written an article saying that he thinks there is one coming.
Well, who knows what's in Keir Starmer's mind, but what I understand is that Rachel Reeves's position is under threat. Now, there's a danger there for Starmer, because if he sacks Rachel Reeves on the grounds of her economic policies, then he's in as much trouble as Rachel Reeves did. We saw that with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. He goes, she goes 11 days later. So he can't sack
That's a great point.
Rachel Reeves. He can't sack Rachel Reeves for her economic policies. But what is happening now, lo and behold, the BBC start reporting on her expenses from 20 years ago. What was it?
And the CV.
And her CV. Even the BBC's doing that. That shows me, the way I see it, David, someone very high in Labour is leaking this to discredit Rachel Reeves so that if she is given the boot, she can be given the boot for those reasons, not how she's managing the economy.
Oh, that's fascinating. And of course, we've talked also about Richard Hermer, the Attorney General, as well. Drip, drip, drip of clients that he's supported in the past. That is not a good look for Keir Starmer. Lisa Nandy under threat, the Culture Secretary. Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, as well. If Starmer, and he does need a reset, I mean, goodness knows how many resets the Labour government has already had, and the plan for change, which is yet another rehash as far as I can see. If he was going to do it, and if he is trying to draw a line under the administration and to move forward, when might he do that reshuffle?
Well, what people are saying is it'll probably be a late spring, early summer. He doesn't want to be seen to be panicking. I get that from a political point of view, but he does need a reset that becomes a narrative over people like Lord Hermer. There's definitely a narrative over Rachel Reeves. One is developing over Bridget Phillipson. Sometimes you have to just lance the boil without being seen to panic. So I suggest the most likely is probably late spring, early summer, but I may be wrong.
And just in terms of that, and it is very difficult to see into the future, what might sort of cause that to come a bit quicker? What other bumps in the road could there be for the Labour government?
Well, I think more economic doom and gloom is the big one. And of course, a failure to get on top of illegal migration across the channel. Although, as I understand it, Yvette Cooper's position is not under threat, at least not at the moment. The big one is the economy. If Rachel Reeves needs to go against her hard and fast rules, if she has to increase tax or if she has to lower spending more than she thought, that will be a sign to Starmer that something has to be done.
And of course, Rachel Reeves made a big play of this, didn't she? She said, we've done all the heavy lifting. We've had all the serious insults in the last budget. And of course, people were hit very, very hard indeed. I think the proof of the pudding is going to come April, and to look at the job losses as a result of the employer national insurance contribution.
That's absolutely a great point, David. And obviously, employers' national insurance has hit small businesses massively. We're already seeing it. They're already under strain. Is going to only get worse. That's going to hit hard as well. You're absolutely right.
And is there a sense, actually, that these sort of metropolitan elite Labour types who live in Islington have absolutely no idea how the SMEs actually function, how the pubs, the hospitality venues actually function?
Yes, because so few of the Labour Party top bods in the cabinet have business experience themselves. And if you don't have business experience yourself, you don't know how awful it can be when the economy turns. So I think that is a big part. I would say, by the way, David, that Morgan McSweeney, who's Chief of Staff under Starmer, I think he gets it, but his party doesn't. He's trying to shift Starmer to a more sort of patriotic point of view, a more patriotic, small c conservative way of running the government. The trouble is that goes against all Starmer's instincts. So it's going to be fascinating to see what plays out.
And of course, for Starmer, and I mentioned this earlier in the programme, I think he has a decision to make. Does he cosy up to the United States, our closest ally? Does he actually decide to get into bed with Europe? Dan Hannan tweeted something very interesting. He said that actually what we need is some sort of strategic alliance with Canada, with Australia, with New Zealand, our natural allies. I would tend to agree.
Yeah, Kanzuk. Well, Hannan, who's been going on about this for many years, I generally support him. Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the UK have such strong cultural ties. Common head of state in King Charles, of course, common language, common way of doing democracy, common attitudes to things like free speech. So, of course, it makes sense for those four countries to cooperate much, much more. I think what Daniel Hannan is saying is this is a far more productive relationship than the EU would ever be for the UK. I think quite a few people I can imagine nodding their heads as he's saying that and tweeting that.
Is Starmer safe, finally?
I think Starmer is for the foreseeable future. Let's remember, he achieved an absolute massive landslide, mainly because of the Tories.
With fewer votes.
Only a third of the vote, which is big, weak spot, of course. If I were in Labour, I'd be fast-tracking Wes Streeting, because I think Wes Streeting, notwithstanding he's got a narrow majority in his own constituency, that's his only problem. But Streeting seems to be the man of the moment to replace Starmer in the long run, but I don't see it happening anytime.
But also, at the same time, Wes Streeting has to show that he has actually been effective as the Health Secretary. So you have to get patients off the trolleys in the corridors. You need to see waiting lists come down. You need to show that actually throwing 200 billion quid at the NHS was worth the money.
A huge test for Wes Streeting, an absolutely huge test. If he passes it, or even if he does okay in it, he's surely in the box seat. But I do want to come back to that narrow majority in his own constituency, just a few hundred votes. That's a really tough one for him.
Absolutely. Really good to talk to you. Thanks ever so much, Robert. Really good indeed. Robert Taylor there, political commentator, talking about the big political stories of the day. We'll take a break. After the break, your thoughts, please, your calls. Get in touch. Also, what do you think about the Prime Minister saying he's ready to commit British boots to the soil to protect Ukraine? Are you happy about that? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm David Bull, in for Ian Collins. Thanks very much for your company this afternoon. I'm asking about Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, saying he's thought long and hard about this and he is ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. I was thinking this morning, I wonder if the country is actually behind him. Also, when you talk to some of the army generals, they're saying, look, that's fine. We absolutely will do what the Prime Minister asks us to do, but you have to equip us properly. We've only got 75,000 troops in the army, but we need to spend more money on defence. Now, over the weekend, we were talking about this. We're at 2.3% of GDP. There were rumours that Starmer was going to make an announcement today to say, yes, we are going to increase spending of defence up to, say, 3% or maybe 4% of GDP, which costs a lot of money, by the way. If you go up to 2.5%, that's 5 billion quid a year you've got to find. So to get to 2.75, 10 billion pounds. Now, it seems to me we can find billions of pounds for all sorts of other things. And I would argue that defence of the realm is paramount, because without defence of the realm, we have nothing else. Now, then Starmer has rode back on that and said, no, we made a commitment to 2.3%. That's what people voted for. I'm not sure that that is true. And now Starmer is also putting himself as this sort of pivotal position between the United States and the EU as well. We know that at the moment, and actually in about half an hour, the European summit is being convened with all of the leaders of the various European nations convening to decide what they need to do. You've got President Zelensky saying what we need is to have a European army, something I would rail against, and I think many people in this country would rail against, because we have NATO. And actually, Trump is right. Those constituent countries need to up their spending of defence if they want to stay within the NATO umbrella. I think on many levels he is right. Now, the flip side of that is, of course, if you then have the USA and Russia negotiating a truce in Ukraine without Zelensky, is Putin just grinning? Is this appeasement? Is this a Chamberlain moment? I'm beginning to think that maybe it is. Maybe Putin is regrouping. Maybe he will then attack another European country. Then what happens? The questions are very complex indeed. Grace is on the line from London. Good morning. Good morning, Grace. Good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon. Yes, I think the getting armies to fight Russia in this situation from Europe is absolute madness. I think it's a prelude to World War III. And now we're in a time where we have such advanced technology that this is absolutely critical. It's total madness.
So what? Sorry. If you were in charge, what would you do right now?
Well, I think it's so shocking what's happened. I mean, for decades, Putin's been demonized. Now Trump's breaking bread with him. What do you say? I mean, it's like it's very difficult. I mean, for me, it's very clear that this is just the great game, and ordinary people will be sacrificed.
Or, can I just throw back at you, or is Trump being extremely clever here, luring Putin in, saying, look, let's do a deal, let's talk about what is possible, because over the weekend it looked like Russia would have to cede some of its sovereignty. At the same time, they're saying, hang on a minute, Ukraine cannot be part of NATO. Is that the opening gambit from Trump? He's determined to do some sort of deal. I'm just worried how this is going to play out.
Well, you see, for me, all of it reeks of hypocrisy. American foreign policy has been completely expansionist. So in its own backyard, in Latin America, any country that tries to organize independently, America intervenes. We've seen this in Chile, in Nicaragua. It's all, they're damned. But when Putin Ukraine is on his doorstep. Half the people speak Russian. I mean, I'm not...
But it doesn't mean they are Russian, does it?
No, and I'm not condoning it, but I feel that it just, to me, this is all total hypocrisy. And from the point of view of ordinary people, if you look at what happened in Iraq, a lot of those soldiers were not given proper equipment.
No, I know.
How do we treat our veterans anyway?
I agree.
And my other point I'd like to make, which I think is very important here, this is very patronising for us, because if you look at history, these politicians don't seem to understand that we understand cause and effect. The invasion of Iraq created ISIS. It wasn't there before. Every time you start invading countries and getting involved, it's not like the end of it. You walk away and it's all fine and dandy. It doesn't work like that. Germany has a massive problem. It has 1 million refugees that has so destabilized it that the far right is increasing now, that the popularity for that. And the reason why Germany has all those refugees is because of the invasion of Iraq. So what I would say to these politicians is stop all your war, all your strife. Look at the world and what happens when you play this game. You don't think about the ordinary. Think about the loss of life. Is it 20,000 Ukrainians? How many Russians?
But okay, so I take your point, and those are brilliantly delivered points. But what do we do from here? So if you believe that Putin has invaded Ukraine illegally, annexed those regions which he did pre-2014, what do we do? Do we allow him to keep those regions and say that's fine, or do we go in and say, right, Putin, out of those regions, Ukraine is a sovereign country, Ukraine joins NATO, NATO then defends Ukraine?
I don't think we do that, the second option.
So we sit back and let Putin invade other European countries. That's the real risk, isn't it? Being
played out. That is what is being said, but we don't know that. This is the rhetoric.
Well, I think we do know. We do know in some senses of that, because what Putin is obsessed with is recreating Mother Russia.
Well, look, the thing is, we can say that about China with Taiwan. I mean, there's a war going on in the Congo now. We don't go there. I feel that this is
But of course, Ukraine is in Europe. It's on our doorstep.
It's on our doorstep. Yes, it actually isn't. It's technically in Europe. I mean, it's not. That's another thing they keep saying it isn't. But I think that if you... I really don't see... drumming up armies is the answer to this. After all these thousands of years, of history and what we know, do these wars? I'm sorry, there has to be another way, and I think this is a critical time. All parties should stop and sit down, and the war in Ukraine has to stop. But even that, there are all these caveats. It's going to stop, but we've got to build an army of reserves.
But to stop the war, you have to have an agreement. You have to come to an agreement with Putin, and
we
that
don't
agreement.
know what that is yet.
No, but the agreement then has to be honoured on both sides.
Yes. Well, I think maybe we have to. At this stage, I think we have to wait and see what that agreement is.
I would agree.
But and rather than, because if we start going on that tangent of this is what's going to happen, I mean, it's total insanity. We're in a dangerous world because we have nuclear weapons, a very dangerous world, much more than any conflict of the past. And my concern is that the people at the top, I really don't trust them, and I think someone like Starmer even's come out with that thing about we've got to. I think it's I think it's appalling if you look at how we actually treat veterans. None of the people who went to Iraq who didn't have the right equipment, what compensation have they had? Absolutely none.
No. You make brilliant points, Grace. Thank you so much for the call this afternoon. Craig, good afternoon to you. Craig says, I'm ex-parachute regiment. I've served in Northern Ireland and Afghanistan, and there is no chance whatsoever I would ever serve again. The big question, says Callum, is if you're being asked to fight for this country, what exactly are you fighting for? Fighting for the right to be called right-wing, for being patriotic, or for being worried about what state this country will be in by the time my children and their children are my age? It's interesting, actually. Grace mentioned the rise of the far right. Now, by that she means the AFD. I would argue that actually the AFD isn't far right. They were our partners in the European Parliament when I was there as the Brexit Party. They're not far right. But what you are seeing is a reaction to what is going on in Europe. Uncontrolled migration across Europe. It's not just us in this country that has a major problem with that. Loads of other messages coming in as well. David, is the UK worth fighting for? I am extremely patriotic. This is Sean. But I would say no. We can apply the saying, go woke, go broke to the country, resulting in no pride for what we've become. Successive governments have taken us into a direction that none of us wanted and has reached the critical turning point. Enough of the traditional parties. We need to have something new. Step forward, Mr. Farage, and reform. That is Sean in Gloucester. Keep all of those messages coming in. I'm actually going to be talking about immigration. There is widespread fury as more than 25,000 small boat migrants have reached Britain since Labour came to power. So much for Labour saying they're going to smash the gangs. I'm going to be talking to Dr. Bob Seeley, former Conservative MP, after this break. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. So the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, says he's ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine to enforce any peace deal with Russia. What's your reaction to that this afternoon? 0344 499 1000. Text the word Talk in your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well at talkTV. As a member of the far right, John in Christchurch, good afternoon to you. I would not serve my country. Starmer has made it perfectly clear which section of the community he supports over the last few months. Veterans are always discarded by the UK government. I couldn't agree more. And again, Starmer has shown which section of the community would receive free housing and free benefits. What is it with politicians that they are never happy unless prosecuting a war somewhere? Keep all of those coming in, please, regarding fighting for this country. I've been asking this afternoon, actually, and I asked over the weekend, would you fight for this country? And the response overwhelmingly has been, what am I fighting for? And it seems to be dictated on various terms. I would fight to look after and protect my family, but I wouldn't fight for the country as it currently stands because I don't recognise this country. Let me tell you about this other story today. More than 25,000 small boat migrants have reached Britain since Labour came to power. That is a stunning figure. 240 migrants made the journey on Saturday alone. It brought the number to across the channel since Keir Starmer became Prime Minister to 25,135. If you remember, Keir Starmer promised to smash the gangs. He got rid of the one deterrent we might have had, which was the Rwanda policy. The question is, what is Labour going to do about it? Dr. Bob Seeley, former Conservative MP, joins me now. A very good afternoon to you.
Hi, David, and good afternoon to your listeners and viewers.
Really good to talk to you. So here we go again, 25,000 illegal migrants since Starmer came to power. This year, 1,893. That is 40% higher than in 2022. I'm sure, like you, I'm sick and tired of talking about this. All we are seeing is small boats coming across the channel. We are completely rudderless here. No one is doing anything about it, apart from sticking them all in hotels, and we're paying for it.
I quite agree. Look, I mean, what's the worst thing I think for me now is that the government are now finding a legal pathway for illegals to apply for citizenship. And, you know, this is one of the many things that we closed down. I'm not here to defend the last government's record. In some places it was good, in some places not so good. We tried to get Rwanda in. We should have pulled out the ECHR. We didn't. And I think we all regret doing that, or some of us.
Well, Labour doesn't.
Sorry, I'm talking about the Tories here.
Oh, I see.
We should have done more.
Well, no, Kemi Badenoch doesn't want to pull out, does she?
No, I think she's going to. It's just a question of how we do it, because there are issues with Northern Ireland. But we have to, I mean, the other thing that Kemi says, to be fair, David, is it's not just about the ECHR. You pull out the ECHR and the same human rights laws, the Starmers and the Hermers of this world, will simply go back to various Blairite era laws, like the Human Rights Act, and it's basically use the Human Rights Act rather than the ECHR. So effectively, there is a web of several different laws, as well as the ECHR, that need to be untied. What I would love to see her doing, and I'm sure she will do it in time, is to go to a group of wise experts, a sort of conservative lawyers, and just say, right, how do you unpick all this? And it might just be, David, that the next government, be it Conservative, Reform, or mixture of both, or whatever, if there is a non-Labour government, will introduce very quickly a Great Repeal Act, and we just, within 2 weeks, we scrap a whole bunch of laws that effectively have stopped us governing over the last few years. And if I read in between the lines in what some of the stuff you see in the papers, that's now actually beginning to concern Labour ministers as well, because we don't seem to be able to govern, because every time we try to do stuff, it's challenged in the courts by judicial reviews, by people like Lord Hermer, who seems to spend most of his time not being the Attorney General, but excusing himself, because he seems to have acted for every single enemy of this country, apart from this country itself.
I mean, we saw the illegal migration bill and the dreadful passage through Parliament of that. It was so tortuous. And of course, you know, I will say about the Conservative Party tenure, they had a lot of time to sort this out. They could have repealed some of those laws. And of course, there has been a lot of talk from Reform about having a British Bill of Rights. I think you are right. We need to repeal a lot of these. But surely, as a democratic country, as one of the oldest established countries, we can actually have a legal framework that we make in this country, and we then adhere to it.
Just on the numbers, as I say, I'm not here to defend the last government, but just on the record of it, this became an issue from about 2019 onwards. So this wasn't a massive in 2010. The issue then was people getting on Eurostar, and that's pretty much died a death. So we solved that problem, and unfortunately we then had another problem that came along, the small boats, bang, and then COVID hit us, then the Ukraine war, and frankly government became sidetracked with other issues. And it is easy to look back with hindsight to say, well, I wouldn't have done this or I wouldn't have done that, but we were too slow to react. But at the same time, David, you know, we had Hong Kong people come in. A lot of people were saying led in Hong Kongers, including myself, and then we had the Ukraine crisis. Some of these numbers of legal migrants pushed up by relatively worthy causes. The issue is then you have people coming in on a care worker visa, they're earning 16 grand a year, and they brought half their family with them.
Also I think Boris Johnson was partly to blame for this. Of course, they relaxed the rules, that we got 745,000 net migrants coming, illegal migrants coming into this country, let alone the illegal migrants. And of course, the thing that really upsets people, and every single day there are more and more examples of this. Today is a Jamaican drug dealer who's avoided deportation because he promised, I will only smoke cannabis, I won't actually sell it. I mean, that's an absolute nonsense. Then we've got a violent Polish serial criminal's deportation being blocked under human rights laws. People all around the country are thinking, this is insane.
You're talking to someone who finds this more painful than most, because I'm thinking, what the hell is happening to our courts? And it seems like large parts of the British state, like the Home Office. Remember when the Home Office was saying that if you watch Michael Portillo's Great British Railway Journeys, that's an indicator that you could be on the far right? Yeah, do you remember?
I do remember that. How are you far right?
I mean, you've actually got large parts of the state seemingly despising the majority population, which I find unbelievable. And we've got our judges now who are they just scared of the ECHR? Do they buy into this garbage?
Can I just ask you about that? Because it seems to me it's these lawyers are manipulating the ECHR, and it's the interpretation of that law which they are abusing in many cases.
Mm-hmm. This is because ECHR and you know, all this sort of human rights framework, which seems to be about everyone's human rights apart from the majority. So if you're a criminal, the human rights system will have an absolute field day with you. But if you want your house protected from burglars, yeah, we're not so interested in that. No, look, I mean, it's appalling. We should have repealed all this stuff, and I hope if we ever get another chance, you know, there are so many of these laws that we've just got to scrap because they just prevent ministers and Parliament from governing, and one of the purposes of Brexit was to take back control. And if
I remember it.
If we're not using that, what was the point?
Well, I would agree, and also I think we need to look at the black economy as well. There's another story. Deliveroo has sacked more than 100 riders as part of crackdown on illegal migrants. So it seems to me that you've got all these delivery drivers not properly vetted. Of course, they then don't turn up. And weirdly, actually, a friend of mine said he ordered some food, and the person who delivered that food was not actually the person that was expected, that he was told about on the app. And that they had basically given a responsibility, and no one had done any checks.
No, and the thing is, it's worse. If you ask for a female driver and you get some bloke who's an illegal immigrant, that is potentially dangerous.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we've seen, I think Alexandra Phillips a couple of weeks ago did this documentary saying about the significant rise of rape and sexual assault in because you've got illegals from deeply misogynistic cultures and countries who are coming over here who are frankly a danger to women. And yet, because we put this mantle of victimhood on everyone who comes to this country. If you're a refugee, I mean, there's so many fake asylum claims now, but if you're a refugee, somehow you're a victim, regardless of the moral quality of your character. If you're a criminal, if you're a rapist, if you're somebody who sexually abuses or violently abuses other people. I mean, we seem to have lost our judgment on this. I quite agree with some of your callers.
Can I just ask you, you have an amazing CV. You served in the British Armed Forces from 2008 to 2017. You served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and the ISIS campaigns. Can I just ask you about Keir Starmer saying, I thought long and hard about this. I will commit British boots to the ground to protect Ukraine. You saw Lord Dannatt saying, hang on a minute, we are very happy to do what we're instructed to do, but you need to support the troops. You actually need to equip us. You need to spend more money on defence. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says, oh no, we're not spending any more on defence.
Okay, I mean, look, I'm a reservist, so if I get called up to go because I'm a Russian speaker and I have, form in that part of the world, let's put it like that, I'd certainly go. Do I think we should be sending troops in the state that our military was in? No. And without the US backup, without NATO backup, there is zero credibility. And if you have several thousand British troops on the front line, effectively they're Russian hostages. Let's be under no illusion here. Putin is going to carry on this war until he destroys Ukraine. If for any reason he stops at some point this year, and there's no guarantee that the ceasefire will either be called or hold, he is temporarily using it to re-equip his soldiers or to use other forms of violence and other forms of political warfare.
And if you understand that, and I understand that, why don't the politicians understand that?
I don't know. I think because Keir Starmer's maybe taking from the New Labour playbook, and they absolutely abuse the military, the British military, to try to go and solve all the world's problems. Because one, it looked good to wrap themselves in the flag. Blair did it, and I think because they became over reliant on the military, frankly, and I think they're in danger of doing that again. There is a massive difference between Afghanistan and Iraq. These were troubled campaigns, we didn't, fighting counterinsurgency, non-conventional war is a very difficult thing for military forces to do, especially in the age of horrible human rights lawyers of Phil Shiner type, friend of the Attorney General by all accounts. So it is difficult, but to put 10,000 British troops or several thousand British troops on the front line with the Russians, I think is, unless there is NATO and US backup, I think you are absolutely asking for trouble, because this war is not over and Putin will fight it again. And if he's got British troops there, he could very easily use that to really tie our hands in unpleasant and uncomfortable ways, especially since he is now, President Zelensky says he's about to put 150,000, several divisions of Russian troops into Belarus to intimidate Poland, to maybe strike into the Baltic republics as part of some sort of mixed military, non-military offensive. I'm not quite sure, but I think we need to talk. I think we need to think far more carefully about what we're doing there.
And finally, and I'm sorry, I am way over time, but just in terms of where we go from here, President Trump and this deal, this proposed deal that he is doing with Russia, without Zelensky, without Ukraine. Is Trump being a fool here? Is he underestimating Putin?
Yes, he is, and he's being absolutely compromised by Putin. I don't know why. I don't know if they've got something on him, or I don't know if he's just, in love with gangsters type politicians because he wants to be some sort of gangster wise guy. Trump is, and I love what Vance was saying last week about woke. I love what they're doing to shut down the corrupt diversity industry in the United States. So I'm not blindly anti-Trump, and I think J.D. Vance is a pretty impressive guy. But I think I think Trump is being absolutely played by the Russians. The main battle space, according to their theories, in the mind. And, why have to defeat your enemy when you can corrupt them and corrupt their decision making? And that is what's happening now. It's a really frightening thing to see. Trump is playing into Putin's hands, and Putin is dividing the US and Europe. And this is a really dangerous time we live in. It's not good. And it's actually very bad for all our security. And we're going to have to spend an awful lot more on defense. And even then, without those US guarantees, the threat from Russia is going to become significantly more intense. And I think they're going to try to break NATO and break Western military power in the Baltic or in Moldova or in Poland somewhere in the next few years.
Really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. That's Dr. Bob Seeley there, former Conservative Member of Parliament. We'll take a break. Your thoughts, please, your calls. That's very sobering, isn't it? What did you think of what Bob said just then? This is Talk.
we need to do is get rid of the bureaucratic nightmare that's the NHS. It really is a bureaucracy. If you review a patient's notes now, and I've been in the business 50 years as a doctor, so I can remember the past. Someone was in charge. The doctors were in charge of the patients, and they'd make sure they got a good journey through the bureaucracy of the system. Okay, when I was first a consultant, the costs were much lower than they are now of treating people, and most people were a lot younger.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Back. This is Talk. 5 minutes to 3. Just to remind you, the Emergency European Summit convened by Macron in Paris is about to start in about 5 minutes' time. Olaf Scholz is there from Germany. We've got Donald Tusk from Poland, Giorgia Meloni from Italy, Mark Rutte from NATO, and of course Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission. So we await to see what happens there. Chris is on the line from Epsom. Good afternoon, Chris.
Afternoon. Nice to see you during the week.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. Always good to talk to you. Right, what's on your mind this afternoon?
About the army, but before I do that, I watched your chap earlier talking about somebody from Labour leaking the stuff about Rachel from accounts. I found that very interesting, because you've got to remember it is all down to Starmer, because there is no official title Prime Minister. He is the First Lord of the Treasury.
Indeed he is.
Okay. Now, soldiers. So Starmer wants to put our troops in harm's way again.
Oh, yeah, he's thought long and hard about it.
Yeah, he did, didn't he? He thought so long and hard about it. That's why they've replaced the out-of-date SA-80 with the new AR-15 with its interoperational rail system, but they only bought 10,000 of them.
That sounds about right.
Secondly, you've got to remember the lady that was on earlier as well, talking about Iraq. I lost a lot of friends in Iraq because of snatched Land Rovers being used, which weren't armoured.
Yes.
We've been under-equipped for ages. We used to buy all our own kit when I was serving, and it's got worse since the Berlin Wall fell. And to top the lot, he's going to put boots on the ground, lives in danger, and he's going to tax dead soldiers 20% of any income that goes to their family after they've died, putting their life down for the country.
But you see, for me, and what Bob Seeley said, I think is deeply sobering here, and I'm deeply concerned that Starmer is out of his depth. I'm worried about what Trump is doing as well. In terms of GDP spending, though, we've spoken about this a lot on this channel, but in terms of GDP, Starmer looked like he was going to spend more GDP on defence. It's about 2.3%. Many very wise sources are saying, look, it needs to be 4%, 5%, according to Lord Dannick. What should it be?
He should immediately go to 3.5%, and you could do that by not giving away the Chagos Islands, which is going to do nothing but anger Trump, who we need to stay friendly.
Yeah, Nigel Farage says that's 50 to 90 billion quid we're going to squander.
Yeah, over the period of time it is, when you calculate it out with interest and everything, and inflation. Also, 68 billion to foreign farmers. The whole thing is nuts. There is no strategic plan here. It's like a shotgun going off, and it hits everything and doing nothing. They have no strategic plan at all. We are in a national crisis. And in a national crisis, you pull your trousers up, you stop giving it all away, and you look at what you need to do at home first.
Yeah. Very well said indeed, Chris. Thanks ever so much for your call. Always really good to talk to you. We'll take more of your calls in the next hour. And, of course, as I said, that emergency European summit is starting in about a minute's time. This is being held in Paris. What did you think there about what Dr. Bob Seeley said as well about he's deeply worried about Trump playing into Putin's hands and, of course, Putin sitting there rubbing his hands with glee, looking on and thinking about how much more territory he can gain. After the break, I'm going to be talking about this big story. Britain risks making new blasphemy laws. And we'll also be talking about Reynolds' response to Vance. Andrew Allison, head of campaigns at Popcon, will be joining me here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, very good afternoon to you. 3 o'clock on Monday, February the 17th. I'm David Bull in for Ian Collins. Coming up, Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he is ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine to enforce any peace deal as he attends crisis talks with European leaders in Paris today. They are just arriving in Paris as we speak. Does, though, he have your support? Meanwhile, Britain risks creating a new blasphemy law by the back door by charging a man over the burning of the Quran outside Turkey's London consulate. So the big question this afternoon, is free speech under threat in the United Kingdom? And wait for this, more than 25,000 illegal migrants have reached Britain in just 7 months since Labour came to power. Your thoughts this afternoon, please. 0344 499 1000, calls charged at the national rate. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well, at talkTV. Well, as I said, that meeting of the European leaders just underway. underway at the moment. I'm looking at the feeds there. European leaders attending emergency talks on Ukraine. Of course, as I was saying earlier on in the programme, you've got Donald Trump, the American president, and of course then you've also got Russia trying to broker a deal without actually involving Ukraine or indeed the European Union. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer is sort of saying, I am ready to intervene. I want to be this sort of middleman. This is in the Times this morning. The Prime Minister will act as a bridge to Trump in the peace talks. So in terms of the big players there in Paris, we've got Keir Starmer is going to be there, or is there Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, Poland's Donald Tusk, Italy's Giorgia Meloni, NATO's Mark Rutte, and the European Commissioners Ursula von der Leyen. So what are they doing? Well, the aim of this is to establish a unified European strategy concerning the conflict in Ukraine, particularly in light of US President Donald Trump's recent announcement of initiating these negotiations. It was fascinating to talk to Dr. Bob Seeley earlier, saying that this is a very worrying inflection point in history, and Trump is underestimating Putin, that Putin will regroup. Putin will then try and gain more territory in Europe. And I wondered what your thoughts were on that this afternoon. Lots more to talk about as well. Loads of messages coming in as well. Katie says, just a thought, David. If Putin dies, will the threat of Mother Russia die too? We spoke about that in the office before we came on air. David, Bob Seeley talking rubbish again. If Americans still had Biden or Harris in charge, the Ukraine war would go on forever. At least Trump wants to bring it to a resolution. David says, Mike in Whitney, good afternoon to you. What people don't realise is just how monumentally huge Russia is. Absolutely. It's the biggest country on the planet. It borders 14 countries, all of which are terrified about what Putin might do next. Ukraine did not attack Russia. Why should it give up sovereign territory just because some greedy tyrant wants to destroy its population and steal its resources? Now, over the weekend, there was talk about Russia ceding sovereignty. But today, Sergei Lavrov has said that is absolutely off the table. That is not going to happen. And Gertie, good afternoon to you. Doesn't Starmer have an advisor to help him avoid these reckless decisions? Doesn't he realise he's turning the UK into a defenceless country and risking our relationships with once strong allies? He's handing over our troops to other nations without proper discussion with the relevant people. It feels like he's competing with Trump, trying to one-up him. Michelle, hi David. So not yet 8 months into number 10. No, that's right, 7 months so far and counting. Keir Starmer has almost got us to war with Russia. Yes, I would help fight in whatever way I could. Both my grandfathers fought in the First World War. I would owe it to them for a start. The whole thing is very depressing indeed. Great show. Thanks, Michelle. That's Michelle in Bristol. Let's talk about this story as well. Britain risks creating a new blasphemy law by the back door by charging a man over the burning of the Quran outside Turkey's London consulate, according to a senior Tory MP. Robert Jenrick, he is the Shadow Justice Secretary. He has warned that the decision by the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, threatened freedom of speech, which he said must be prized, even if it was offensive to many Muslims. He said this decision risks creating a de facto blasphemy law by the back door. This is a dangerous path that must be resisted. Burning a Quran, like burning any religious text, is offensive to some and not conduct most people would support. But that is not the point. The point is the criminal law. There is a difference between things we don't like as a society and things that we make criminal. Well, joining me now is Andrew Allison, Head of Campaigns at Popcon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, David. How are you?
Yeah, really good to talk to you. It's always good to talk to you, actually. Where do you stand on this? I think Robert Jenrick is right, actually. The whole point about this, he is trying to differentiate between actually having freedom of speech in this country, which I think is in short supply, and then the offence of burning a religious text which is deemed to be sacred by some groups. But he's trying to make that distinction and trying to decide what is right, what many of us object to, and what is actually against the law.
Correct. I think he's got this absolutely right. I mean, for the record, I'm against book burning in general. I don't care what it is. I think it's a futile exercise. J.K. Rowling responded a few months ago when some of her former fans said they were going to burn the Harry Potter books. She said, well, go ahead, it's your property. I've still got paid for it, which I thought was a really good response. So no, I mean, this is a de facto blasphemy law through the back door. Of course, it's grossly offensive. But burning a copy of the Bible would also be grossly offensive.
To some.
For some, yes. But we can't arbiter good taste. Or we can't say, well, I'm offended by that, so therefore someone should go to prison as a result of that, just because we're offended. Otherwise, we wouldn't say anything, would we?
So it is a very, very clever distinction, this. He said it could be a public order offence to burn a Torah scroll at the doors of a synagogue or a Quran outside a mosque. I totally get that. But he goes on to say this is entirely different to burning a text as a protest in a setting that isn't a religious setting.
Yes, I think it's also illegal, and perhaps some viewers and listeners could correct me if I'm wrong, but I actually think it's illegal to burn anything on a public street anywhere, but that's through environmental and considerations. That goes back to 1990. Well, it is, because if you stand on the steps of a synagogue and burn a sacred book...
Yeah, it's offensive.
Then you expect a response. If someone came up and thumped you, then don't be surprised. And exactly the same if you started burning a Bible on the steps of a church or a cathedral. And I imagine it's exactly the same for Muslims on the steps of a mosque. So yes, it is important to have that context. But as a general rule, we cannot be charging people and potentially imprisoning people for burning sacred texts.
And who has got this right and who has got this wrong? So the police, the CPS, seem very keen to jump onto people who are deemed to be committing acts which are deemed to be offensive by some groups without actually applying common sense.
Yes. Perhaps we need something that started in America just recently, where a little bit of common sense has come in, where they're getting rid of the DEI agenda, because I'm sure this is where it is all coming through. And of course, we do have activist judges in this country as well, who make up the law as they go along. And it seems the politicians are not really making the laws very much. They're just being interpreted.
Do you think there's a real sense in this country that actually we are increasingly unable to speak our minds, to speak freely, and that is the cornerstone of our democracy?
Well, precisely. You cannot be described as a free country if you do not have free speech. It's a cornerstone of a free society. And I remember a survey, David, I think it was about 5 years ago, where people said that they did not feel as free to speak their minds then as they did 5 years prior to that, so around about 2015. And I would argue that that has actually got worse now. People are self-censoring, and they should not have to self-censor.
I would agree. And actually, I think it's very healthy to be able to be in a situation where you espouse your views, where you talk to your friends and say, look, I don't agree with X, Y and Z. And if you don't allow that freedom of speech, you push it underground.
Well, of course you do. Although you will remember that the SNP were or are wanting to introduce laws that will say that what you say around your dinner table at home, in your own home, your own dinner table, you could be reported to the police for expressing views that the SNP and the Scottish Government don't think are appropriate.
Where do you stand on Angela Rayner sitting down and trying to construct some legal definition of Islamophobia?
It's nonsense. I mean, why? For starters, David, why just Islamophobia? I mean, yes, we have definitions of anti-Semitism, but we don't seem to have any definitions of anti-Hinduism or anti-Christianity. But it all seems to boil down to Islamophobia. And it strikes me that if you make the mildest criticism of Islam, you're accused of Islamophobia. And the reason you're accused of Islamophobia is because the people who are trying to accuse you of that are trying to stifle free speech. They're trying to shut you down. I mean, the whole thing to do with the rape gangs that we've just been finding out about in more graphic detail than I think we wanted to. It's highlighted that these cases were not taken seriously, or they were brushed under the carpet, because of community relations, community cohesion. Well, where's that got us? By trying to sweep this under the carpet, it's created an even bigger disaster.
You mentioned watching across the pond and Dodge and the arrival of Elon Musk to do that, but also J.D. Vance made that speech, quite an inflammatory speech. I thought it was pretty spot on, actually, when he said the threat from within to free speech poses a greater danger to Europe than Russia. And I think he was right in that. Jonathan Reynolds, who is the business secretary, pushed back. This was yesterday on various television programmes, saying J.D. Vance has got it wrong.
I don't think it's a greater threat than an invasion of Russia if you happen to live in Eastern European countries.
I think he was using it as a parallel.
Well, he probably was. I just wouldn't have used it like that. Although I will say to J.D. Vance, if he ever sees a clip of this, please also acknowledge that this woke virus started in the United States. It came from your country. Now, you may be doing everything that you possibly can to stop this, but please acknowledge that this came from America and it started to infect the world.
Can I ask you, if I may, in terms of politics, just about the rise of Reform UK? And the fact is there's this survey out today showing that Reform is more trusted than the Conservative Party. Kemi Badenoch just doesn't seem to be cutting the mustard.
Give her a chance. I mean, back in...
Really? We've given her a chance.
Hold on, David. Let's go back to 1975, because we've just been remembering...
Only yesterday.
50th anniversary of becoming leader of the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
Week after week after week, Jim Callaghan beat her in Prime Minister's questions. He knocked her around the park. It took her a long time to get settled in as leader of the opposition. Now, I agree that what Margaret Thatcher did not have was reform, or a party like Reform on the right, breathing down her neck.
What, like a truly Conservative Party?
Well, it could well be argued like that, but I mean, I do believe that Kemi Badenoch is a true Conservative. I'm a true Conservative.
I don't doubt it.
Conservative. But just, I think she needs to be given time. But she is going to have to start improving pretty soon during Prime Minister's questions. But she's also going to have to start coming out with more Conservative positions. We don't need detailed...
Well, I don't think you have any, do you? Don't you have one policy currently?
Well, we don't need policies at the moment, David. We just need positions, detailed policies.
OK, but you have one position, don't you?
Well, there should be more than one position.
But I think there's only one.
Hopefully she's coming out with more than one position.
How long do we wait for the second one?
But I know what she believes in, and I know she's a true Conservative. I know what her principles are. I know what her instincts are. She just needs to come out.
Isn't there a worry, though, for the Conservative Party that actually what you're going to do is, if you stay in this state of limbo, you are going to lose more and more voters to parties like Reform UK, and therefore the actual very existence of the Conservative Party is under threat?
That is a possibility, yes. I mean, we got a shellacking at the last general election, and in my view, rightly so. For the last 14 years, the Conservatives have seen the country move in a leftwards direction. The Blair consensus was not got rid of. Indeed, it was extended by the Cameron government. So yes, there's a lot of reasons there for voters to be angry, and it doesn't surprise me that the voters are now saying that they trust Reform over the Conservative Party. But I would also caution that voters change their minds.
Sure.
And we are, I would think, just over 4 years away in the spring of 2029 from a general election. So a lot can happen then. So we've got to give Kemi time to get her feet under the table. We need more Conservative positions. So a clear direction of travel for the Conservative Party, and then we'll see where it takes us.
She's the wrong leader, isn't she?
I don't think she is the wrong leader. I don't think like that. She's got one of the most difficult jobs in politics, if not the most difficult job in politics.
Really? She's pushing at an open door. Keir Starmer, deeply unpopular. Every single policy he comes out with, absolutely everyone seems to hate. She's pushing at an open door.
Well, he's got the levers of government, I suppose, to change things. But I agree. I mean, Starmer's dreadful. I mean, I always thought this Labour government would be bad, but perhaps not quite as bad as it actually is. But, as I said just a couple of minutes ago, Margaret Thatcher did not have another party from the right breathing down her neck. And she had the time to get ready and prepare for government. But indeed, she did prepare for government and was Prime Minister for 10.5 years. So it can end well.
Ever the optimist. Really good to talk to you. Thanks ever so much, Andrew. Andrew Allison, the head of campaigns at Popcon. We'll take a break. After the break, your calls, thoughts and messages. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. I'm David Bull, in for Ian Collins. And Anne-Marie is on the line from Lanarkshire. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Right, if they bring in blasphemy laws, it opposes the European community, the European human rights.
Well done. Love that.
Article 18 states quite clearly that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion.
Yes, but apparently you say over some things, not others, it seems to me. It seems extraordinary that Angela Rayner is drawing up a definition of Islamophobia. I don't see any definition of being anti-Christian.
It doesn't matter. It's against the law. And I'll tell you what, there isn't one country in this whole world, the Islamic country in this whole world, that respects human rights. But also Article 19 states everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedoms to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. They're locking these people up in the court for expressing their opinion against the Human Rights Act.
That's really interesting. I'm really worried, though, that if you suppress people's views and thoughts and opinions and you're not allowed freedom of discussion, then, as I said earlier, it drives everything underground.
Absolutely, but they want us at loggerheads with each other. It suits them, but they can't use the Human Rights Act to bring in illegal immigrants and then stop the people that live in this country. It seems to me that the taxpayer is the hardest hit in this whole country. We pay for it. We pay for them to govern us, and they oppress us. And this is an action of oppression. But it opposes the Human Rights Act. They can't do it. It's against the law. They can't make acts that oppose the law.
Anne-Marie, that is a brilliant call. Thank you very much. Betty is on the phone from London. Good afternoon, Betty.
Yeah, good afternoon. Yes, about this blasphemy law.
Yes.
I don't know why there's such a hoo-ha, because as far as I can see, we've already got one. But the only religion that it benefits is Islam. Because if somebody criticises or insults Christianity, nothing happens. We just pray for these people that they'll have a change of heart. If you insult or criticise Islam, the chances are that either you're going to get your collar felt, like the man that burnt the Quran, or you're going to wear a stab vest and be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life.
How have we ended up in this position?
I really, well, it's because of the influx of a totally alien culture.
I was talking about this the other day, about just the lack of integration, which I see in East London all the time, every single day. The fact is you've got people living in silos. They refuse to integrate, and I think that is a major problem.
Exactly. And there are just too many people in such a short time to integrate them. It's just impossible. You know, there are some great Muslims, you know, our local corn shop and what have you, but it's these Islamists. And
fundamental Islamists.
People are people are frightened to speak out because the Muslim culture can be very violent.
Well, it can. I think all religions can be violent. It's the interpretation of that religion. And you rightly say there are some very nice and law-abiding Muslims as well, and it's important to differentiate between them. Betty, thank you for that. Lots of messages coming in. David, you are being biased. You're promoting your Reform Party. Stop promoting your party on Talk Radio. Kemi is doing a good job as the new head of the Tory party. If people vote for your Reform Party, they will keep Starmer in. Jenny in Amersham, very interesting point there, Jenny. I might throw back to you that if you vote for the Conservative Party, you are letting Labour in. I might throw that back. After cycling around the Orkney Islands, says Kev, you can't help but notice the whole island is full of derelict buildings and not much else. Surely it would make much more sense and be considerably cheaper to build makeshift huts to house the migrants. You could have medical blocks, you could have food halls, processing halls and anything else they need. Once they're processed, they can then be brought to the mainland or taken directly to an airport to be returned to their original homes. Just an idea. David, I served in the British Army for 25 years. I was involved in a number of conflicts, including Malaya, Borneo, 5 tours of Northern Ireland. With Starmer as Prime Minister, there is absolutely no way I would go to fight for Ukraine. I'm positive there are millions of Brits who would agree with me. Keep all of those messages coming in, please. This is Reg. I'm very concerned about Keir Starmer going to Europe to say he's the bridge between Europe and Trump. He hasn't got one single thing right. Since he's been the Prime Minister, what makes him think he's going to do well this time? I'm very concerned. That's Reg. Thank you. David says, Steve, I 100% agree with Ukraine battling Russia to retain and retake territory in the West, providing support. In fact, I believe we should pour more arms into Ukraine. However, those that say we need to stop doing it to stop Putin attacking more countries is poppycock. All the other countries on his western border, apart from Belarus, are NATO members, and he will never risk trying to invade a NATO member. Really? I'm not so sure. Loads of other messages coming in as well. So Keir Starmer says he is ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine to enforce any peace deal with Russia. He says he's thought long and hard about it. He is willing to commit that. As I keep saying, fine, say the generals in the army. We only have 75,000 troops. We will do what you request or what you order us to do, but you have to equip us properly. Now, when you look at how much money we spend on defence, 2.3%, what should it be? Should it be 2.5%? By the way, that's another 5 billion quid a year. Should it be 2.75%? That's another 10 billion quid a year. What should it be? 3%, 4%, 5%? What's the metric? How do you actually measure that? Ian is in London. Good afternoon.
David, we need soldiers for the army.
Correct.
Well, I would say, how many are in the cabinet? You've got Starmer, you've got Reeves, you've got Lambert. They'll be fine out there. They can do it.
Oh, they'd be brilliant.
They'd be brilliant. But also, by another sort of sense, isn't this like very easy for Starmer to say to himself, right, we've got this with Ukraine, we can do this. We can hide all the problems that Reeves has done with the economy. We can put up the tax to pay for all her mistakes, but say it's all to do with the Ukraine.
Yeah. What about the idea of actually ditching the Chagos deal and saving, what, 90 billion quid?
And what about Chagos? What about net green or whatever?
Yes, net zero. There's another good one.
Right. There's so many things that you can actually do. Even with this business, with your side of it, with the medical, you know that he says he's cut the waiting list today?
Yes, he did.
Right? Yep. How much of that is because they did the pay deal with the doctors that actually suddenly made that they weren't on strike all the time? So, yes, of course...
Well, of course it will have a bearing. I don't know is the honest answer to all of that. Just in terms of Starmer's management and leadership of the Labour Party, someone said earlier, does he have an advisor? I think it's a really good question.
I don't think he has got an advisor because he'd know that quite simply there are many, many Labour MPs that actually give no sort of thing to what goes on here. They're all interested in their own little sort of like world outside of the UK. They're not interested in the UK. He is holding on to power by a thread. He's absolutely inside the...
How long has he got?
Truthfully?
Yeah.
My biggest fear is if he goes in, is what's going to replace him. Because they talk about streeting. Streeting, yes, maybe the public would like it, but the Labour Party wouldn't like it.
Do you think Streeting is experienced enough?
No. I've met him. He's local to me. I've met him on 2 or 3 occasions. He's not strong enough. He's got no real power or anything else.
And, of course, the other thing is he doesn't have a very strong majority, and he has a very big changing demographic in that seat.
Well, that's right. And I live in South Woodford. He lives in, he's North Ilford North, I think it is.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you now, if it was done again today, he would lose that seat.
I think you're right. I would agree with that. Also, just let me ask you about Rachel Reeves. I mean, she's had a pretty shambolic time, I think, in terms of the budget. I think there were some major mistakes, the winter fuel allowance, the national insurance contributions there, the employer contributions, all coming in April. When that then hits in April, and we're already seeing this, people laying off staff, young people not being employed. We won't really understand what's going on until April, May, June. I think she's in trouble.
She is in trouble. It's like Harmer. But the thing is, if you got rid of Reeves, right, who would never really was top in economics anyway, who are you going to replace her with? There is nobody in that cabinet that's got any economic history. They don't know. What are you going to do? Yvette Cooper with her husband, Ed Balls, that balled it up before.
I would go so far as to say there's no one in cabinet with any experience of anything.
They haven't. They have not. The only one that's got experience of anything is Starmer with Harmer that actually know how to get round the rules to get more immigrants in. That's the only ones that they seem to have any experience of how to get round the ECHR rules.
And can I just ask you, you mentioned immigration there, 25,000 illegal immigrants have come into Britain since Starmer took office. So he pledged, and that's what people voted on, I'm going to smash the gangs, I'm going to make sure that I get on top of it. The first thing he did was get rid of Rwanda, the one possible credible scheme that might have deterred people from coming into this country. I don't see anything working here. It's just getting worse. And he seems to be rudderless.
He has. He's got not a clue. He hasn't got a clue. The thing is, it's like anything else. It's like with the gangs that go around in London, that go into all these Tesco's and Sainsbury's and do... They've got no fear of what the outcome can be, because they just sort of take it. If they're here, they get over. Might take 6 months, might take a year. They'll be put up in a hotel. They'll be fed. They'll be heated, as opposed to the old age pensioners. And basically, they're in.
Yeah. Really good to talk to you, Ian. Thanks ever so much for your call. We'll take a break. Now, after the break, I'm going to be talking about a massive controversy. A big row has broken out about naked life models. Yes, naked models have been told to put their clothes on at a life drawing class. Why is that? We'll find out after this break. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now, I've got a story for you here. There has been a huge row that's broken out after a life drawing class in North London was told its nude models should wear clothes, following complaints. Yes, this is right. Organisers of the daytime class have accused puritanical Hampstead Community Centre of taking a Taliban attitude to artistic creation. Complaints were made about its naked muses. The art class has been held at the venue for more than 30 years and has long been popular with pensioners. Read into that what you like. It's been popular with pensioners because of one of its sessions taking place on Friday afternoons. Essentially, there's a problem. They're worried that this life class is sandwiched between children using that particular room. I say, what is the problem? Let's talk to Tony Swan first. He is from the Hampstead art classes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
A big row breaking out. Come on, tell us what is going on here.
Well, in a sense, I wish I knew. I was told initially, with no consultation, that they were going to move the class to the evening slot from the afternoon slot.
But hang on a minute, the afternoons are popular because that's when people want to go.
Exactly. And I put it to all the people who went to the afternoon slot, would you be prepared to come to the evening slot? And they universally said no.
Fine.
You know, they're old, generally older people, and, you know, you build your life around these things. And if you come out for the evening slot, you miss your dinner, it's cold, it's wet. It's
can we just talk about what happens at these art classes?
Well, we draw people.
Right, naked people.
Yes, by and large, yes.
Yes. Looking at flattering the human form in all its shapes and sizes.
Oh, indeed. We take all types of models in. Whether we flatter them or not will be up to...
Depends on your drawing. OK, so you were told you were moving to the evenings. So the ladies and gentlemen said, look, we don't want that. We want to stay in the afternoon. So what happened next?
Well, it was offered as an option that we could have a clothed model.
But you don't want that. It's a life class.
Exactly. It's a life class. That's what people come for. Put it to the people again, and they said no.
Right. So
now,
in
effect, we were being told there was nowhere for us now because we didn't want to do the evening and didn't want to do clothes models.
And so why are they asking you to move your classes or to put clothes on?
Well, like you say, there is a preschool class before us and an after-school class after us.
Right.
But we're never in the building at the same time. There's kind of little buffer periods to keep us apart from each other. And, I mean, you said there'd been complaints. Well, as far as I'm aware, there haven't been complaints.
Right.
It's just the management committee have decided that having a naked person in between children's classes is in some way unethical.
Right. But you have, I mean, this is not a new thing, is it? It's been going on for many, many years.
Oh, life drawing's been going on for centuries. But, the class in Hampstead's been going on for 30 years with no problems and no complaints.
And you make certain provisions, don't you, with blackout blinds or whatever?
Sorry, yeah, we block the windows out. You can't see through the door. I've put something in front of the door. People, even if they came in the room, wouldn't see anything.
Right. So where do you go from here?
Well, I mean, I've been extremely fortunate in as much as I've found another venue around the corner, very close by.
And so when you talk to the spokesperson, according to this, the spokesperson for the centre said they are not being prudish in their decision, saying they're very comfortable with nudity in the correct context, but there are safeguarding concerns. I mean, I find this extraordinary because actually children need to understand that actually beauty is in the natural form and actually being naked is our natural state.
And as I said, children come nowhere near the class.
Yeah.
No, it's that simple. There's buffer periods before and after. So that, children outrage parents. No one sees anything.
Right. And you've saved the class, though, have you?
Saved the class, found another venue. We're very happy with it. And our little community have moved away from the community centre and are happily drawing at the new place now.
Wonderful. I wish you lots of luck with that. Thanks ever so much for joining me this afternoon. That's Tony Swan there from Hampstead Art Classes. Let's now talk to Estelle Lovett, who is an art critic. Good afternoon.
Hello, David.
I mean, it's shocking having naked people around.
Are they worried that someone is going to bump into the model, or are they worried that the drawings are going to be not worthy of looking at them?
No, it's safeguarding. I'm very worried about naked people generally.
Right. For a life drawing class, generally it's written up that the person has to be 18. But Tony was quite right. This has been going on since time immemorial. Ever since the beginnings of Western art, artists have always studied and drawn details from a real human figure, from life, in different positions and different poses, because that's the core of one's artistic training. It can be very arduous and perplexing, of course, but don't forget, as human beings, we're geared to identify and recognize and sense every possible sensitivity and disparity that we have from one human body to another, seen in real time. And that's what you cannot get if you don't have a real human figure in the life.
No, I get that completely. What is the difference between painting or drawing someone who is stark naked as opposed to someone who is wearing a modicum of clothing?
Well, absence of dress leaves no room for anything that's thoughtless or ambiguous.
Right.
And the exercises in draftsmanship, you are actually, ever since pre-Renaissance, you had to study the human figure before you actually were allowed to go on to painting. And I love this quote. Renoir said that he didn't believe a painting of a nude was finished until he had the urge to slap its bottom, on the painting.
I'll bear that in mind.
Trying to get it as realistic as possible. There are some people that are going to be offended. I mean, there are some people that are offended by drawings and paintings of naked people. Let me tell them, these are just objects of coloured shapes on a flat 2D surface. We do know, of course, that years and years ago, going right back to the early times, that life paintings were hung up in the main boudoir behind velvet curtains, because it was sort of the equivalent of top shelf porn magazines, if you like. And they were hung especially high so that one's glances could be averted. But, you know, if you don't want to see a naked body and you don't want to draw one, don't sign up for the live class.
No, I totally agree. I'm just thinking back at some of these amazing works of art, and many of them are of naked models. I'm thinking particularly of statues, say, in Rome, for example. And celebration of the human form in its natural context, I think it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, why have we got to be ashamed of? It reminds me as well, the great art historian Kenneth Clark said that a naked body can be exposed and vulnerable and embarrassing, but a nude body, when it's used for educational purposes, should have no uncomfortable overtones. And obviously, life drawing is an educational setup. So I don't understand it. I mean, life drawing, the model is nude. Otherwise, you go to a clothed figure painting class or drawing class.
I wonder also, and obviously this class has made all these sort of attempts to make sure that no one's decency is offended. But also, I just wonder, we are reinforcing stereotypes amongst children that being naked is somehow wrong, and it's not.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, obviously, it's up to the parent at what age they want their child to see another naked body. But, you know, once you're an adult, you have that freedom of choice. But as Tony Swan was saying, that there were blackouts at the windows. It was in between classes. You know, the model, I'm sure, was not parading through so that children could see them either before the class started or when it ended. So I think that this is really going to cause us some harm. I don't just mean to the art community, but I just mean in terms of, you know, the body is something we should celebrate. I mean, the first time you go as an adult to a life drawing room, even though we know there's going to be a naked figure there, it is a bit of a shock because you think, oh my goodness, you know, but that's what happens.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there was one other thing, and I did sort of giggle to myself that it was particularly pensioners that enjoyed this, but there's a really important point behind this, which I think we become more comfortable in our own skins as we get older. I'm particularly minded of nudist beaches, naturist beaches, for example, where people feel freer as they get older.
Yeah, and life models, the wonderful thing about life models as opposed to, let's say, catwalk and fashion models, although they encompass all sorts of shapes and sizes now as well. But, you know, we get to realise and we understand that everybody's form and structure is different. Some are more muscly, some are more sinewy, some are more bony, you know, so everybody's form is different, and that's what makes us magnificent, and we should celebrate that. Art is there to help us celebrate civilization, and I'm sorry, but nude people are part of civilization. If you don't want to draw a nude body, go to the clothed figure class.
Well said, Estelle. Really good to talk to you this afternoon. Thank you for your time. That's Estelle Lovett there, an art critic. What do you think of that about life drawing? Let me know your thoughts on all of the above, or indeed on anything else that we're talking about. Also, Keir Starmer saying he's ready and willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. Your thoughts on that? Let me know everything that you are thinking this afternoon. We'll take your calls, thoughts and messages after the break.
we need to recognize that this is a very serious moment for the security of Europe. The United States is looking like it's stepping back from NATO in its commitment to help support peace in Europe, and that is very serious indeed. I think it represents extraordinary naivety on the part of President Trump, and the rest of his team. And I'd like to remind your readers that I think it's your viewers that I think it is.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk. We were talking about life classes earlier. Many of you getting in touch. David, so they're worried. This is Sean. So they're worried children might see a naked body in the art studio, unless, of course, it's at a pride march. Then it's okay to wander around naked. Brilliant point. Graham. It all sounds like a bit of a storm in a D-cup. Graham in Bushy, thank you very much. Carry on humour, persist. Keep all of those messages coming in, please. Nice to see you on in the afternoon, David, says Brad in Cambridge. What these people... Oh, we were talking about Starmer and actually saying I'm committing British troops to fight for Ukraine. What these people seem to overlook is they wouldn't be fighting for Starmer or the Labour Party. They would actually be fighting for their family, their friends and their own survival. Of course, I would fight. Helen is on the line from Leicestershire. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, David. Great show.
Thank you.
I just wanted to refer back to the conversation you were having with Candice Holdsworth.
Oh, right at the beginning, yes, at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, about mammograms and the low uptake. You might know the answer to this, but what we don't know, as far as I'm aware, is how many mammograms are done which produce false positives.
It's a great question. It's a really good question. I don't have the figure to hand, but I think... No, I don't have the figure to hand, but I think if you got a positive mammogram, you would have re-imaging, you would have some sort of aspiration done. So if you had a lump, you'd stick a needle in it, work out if there are any abnormal cells in it and so on, and you would then probably refer for something like an MRI. So the point, but also... you know, I think what they're trying to get across to women, and I know this, that people are frightened, and I get that, totally get that. But obviously if we don't screen, we don't catch people earlier. And I think it ties beautifully into the one about the prostate cancer, because the test for prostate cancer is notoriously terrible, but they're now using AI and improving the results. And I wonder actually whether those two are tied together and you use AI and mammograms and you get a better outcome from that.
Yeah, sure. I just think that anecdotally I've heard of quite a few cases where people have false positives and they're given the information that they might have cancer, which is terrifying.
Of course.
And then they go through unnecessary treatments. I just think that when you're advocating that more women take up mammograms, that the alternative view should be included so that people
I 100%. Oh, look, I totally agree, and it's absolutely up to every individual and its choice.
Yeah, sure.
But I think from my point of view, I would rather people are tested, that if you find something that is a suspicious shadow, that you then investigate a little further, that's all.
Yeah, OK, fair enough. Fair enough. I just wanted to make the point that...
Well, it's a great point, Helen. Thank you very much for keeping me on my toes this afternoon. Dave is in Essex. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, David. I'd just like to say thanks for taking my call. I think it's absolutely perverse that Keir Starmer is prepared to commit 10,000 of our troops to a foreign country, which is basically a regional war, when he's not prepared to secure our own borders.
Yep.
And secondly, I'd just like to say, on what mandate does this man think he's coming from? I mean, he got 30% of a 30% vote. I mean, this guy is hardly representative of the aspirations of this country. And I'm to be quite honest, Doctor, I'm sitting here beside myself because I just can't. I just can't believe what's going on, and I think a decision like this should be put to the country. I think this country needs to wake up and wake up quickly before we've got bloody body bags coming back.
I agree. And also, you see all of these warnings, constant warnings over the years. We're in a pre-war world. We're no longer a tier 1 fighting force. Are you worried that Putin is luring Trump into a false sense of security?
Sir, if you want my honest opinion, I think Vladimir Putin should be one of the contenders for the Nobel Peace Prize, because that man, I swear, that man, he's done everything in his power to control this onslaught, this black operation.
Do you mean Zelensky or Putin?
I'm talking about Putin. I'm talking about...
But Putin invaded Ukraine.
Oh, but David, after years of provocation, we just don't get the news. People don't understand the history, David. Please tell me that you understand where I'm coming from.
Well, Ukraine is a sovereign country, isn't it? And of course then... And I understand...
Victoria Nuland's war.
Sorry?
This is Victoria Nuland's war. This war is being conducted by the CIA, MI6, Mossad. This is an intelligence war.
OK, I think we agree to disagree on that, but good to hear from you. I always like to hear controversial viewpoints. Keep those messages coming in. Lots of you talking about this, and it is extraordinary. And for me, the wording, I think, of this is odd from Keir Starmer. I will commit British troops. Look, I understand that you're in charge and everything. I'm ready to put troops in Ukraine. I'm ready. I think it's the country, actually, needs to commit troops to Ukraine if that is the decision that has to be made. But equally, if you're going to do that, I think you have a moral obligation to ensure that those troops actually have proper funding and to make sure that we protect our soldiers. And we've talked repeatedly about the terrible way that we treat our services and our personnel after they have left the armed forces. And I think that needs to be borne in mind. Also, this is extraordinary, the way the Prime Minister now sees himself as this bridge to Trump in the peace talks. This is the front page of the Times. And I'm just worried that this turns into political opportunism, and he's using this to try and improve his own profile and his own standing and status in the world. Peter Cardwell.
Can I just point out I will be wearing all my clothes between now and 7 o'clock.
Oh, I see.
Yes, there we are. You see, it's a link to a story you did earlier.
It's
not just a random comment.
No, but the brilliant kind of note in that was the pensioners love going, and I just...
I'm sure they do.
I mean, that's terrible, but I did giggle.
It's all in the cause of art, I'm sure.
It is. Well,
nothing
also,
to do with just
but
looking
also
at
for children, look, we're naturally naked. That's how our form is.
Yeah. No, I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing. Also, if you go to a life art drawing class,
yes, surely
you expect someone to be,
So also someone emailed in earlier saying that you would be great fighting for your country, but you might be a bit cold.
I think I'd be bad at both things. I think I'd be bad at both fighting for my country and the life drawing class.
And
neither of those things
imagine
would
the
be...
discipline issues we'd have.
Yes,
they'd say, "Do this, Cardwell." Well, I'm not sure about that.
I'm not sure about that. Not sure about that. We should emphasise there's a peacekeeping force that Keir Starmer is proposing. But what I haven't heard.
What did you think of that, by the way? I'm ready.
Well, I haven't heard. Yeah, well, exactly. It's up to Parliament. And I haven't heard any politician today. Maybe they have. Maybe I've missed it. Who have said, "Well, actually, hold on a second, Keir. We will decide this.
Yes.
Not you as Prime Minister. This is not just up to you. This is up to us." And there is, Ukraine is one of the few issues on which there is almost, not quite, but almost cross-party consensus within Parliament. So I think if he says that he wants a peacekeeping force to go to Ukraine, that will be fine. But I also think he's jumping ahead a little bit because the negotiations haven't even started yet, and Europe is paddling very quickly to keep up with 100%, America,
but this is his political posturing. He wants to be up there in terms of, I'm in charge, I'm the bridge between Trump and the US and the European Union.
Yes.
Doesn't he?
Of course he does. No, and he wants to look as if he has some form of momentum in all of this. but he doesn't. He and other European leaders are attempting
been caught on the hop.
yeah, they have, and we're talking about that throughout the programme. We'll also go down to the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference in London, huge big conference that says a lot of things that our viewers and listeners would be, I would imagine, very happy with. We'll talk about universities doubling investment in diversity in 3 years. Also, we've got an interview with Barry Mizzen, who's the father of Jimmy Mizzen. Do you remember the horrible rapper, drill rapper, who was putting stuff on, he'd been released, he was on probation or parole, and he'd been putting stuff online, earning money from it. So we'll talk to the father of